Chapter 371. He should be the commander-in-chief. He's so powerful at such a young age. Who is he? Peng Yu was even more confused about Yang Qindong's mysterious identity. Yang Qindong was indeed surrounded by a few officers. He was currently announcing the battle plan to everyone. Heroes, it's time for you to show off your skills. After a few days of rapid marching, the enemy doesn't know that we're already behind them. This is the foundation and preparation for our surprise attack. Next, we'll give them a good stab in the ass and let them feel the pain in their hearts. Yes, sir. Hearing that the battle was finally about to begin, the officers were eager to give it a try. Originally, when they set out from Crimson City, they already knew that there would be a battle. In order to get a spot in the battle, who knows how many people's heads were broken in private. Only then did they have the chance to shine. Seeing that everyone was excited, Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. This was the face of an army of tigers and wolves. If everyone's legs trembled and their bodies went limp at the mention of war, such an army would never be able to win a battle. Alright, now I'll announce the battle plan. In a while, there will be 3 signal flares in the air. That's the signal to launch the final attack. At that time, everyone will attack from all sides. Everyone will be like a steel knife stabbing into the enemy's heart. Cold Front Company 1 and Auxiliary Company 1 will attack from the left flank. Cold Front Company 2 and Auxiliary Company 2 will attack from the right flank. Cold Front Company 3 and Auxiliary Company 3 will attack from the middle. The other 2 companies will wait for an opportunity to react to any unexpected situations. Once the attack is successful, the 8 companies in total can attack on their own. When the time comes, platoons will be the attack unit. Remember, this time the enemy is large in numbers. Do not act on your own accord. If anyone wants to be a hero, even if they have made a contribution this time, they will still be held accountable for their mistakes. You must make this clear to the soldiers below. Obey orders, obey orders. This is the first lesson for all Cold Front and Auxiliary Company soldiers. 6th Young Master, please rest assured. No one will dare to disobey orders. Cold Front Company 2's commander Luo Po was the first to express his stance. Yes, we will not disappoint the 6th Young Master. Lu Zhua, the commander of the auxiliary troops, also expressed his attitude. Very good. Everyone go back and prepare. Remember, no one is to act rashly without orders. Also, no one is to stand out. If the army is exposed because of a single person, they will be punished according to military law. Yang Qindong said with a serious face. At the same time, he was a little excited. Speaking of which, this was his first battle in this world. Although there were only 800 soldiers, it was enough for him. The sky had already darkened. The Huang bandits began to move. According to the plan, a small group of bandits would leave the barracks and head to the rear. Then, General Geng Jun would lead his men to make preparations. A total of 5,000 elite soldiers were going to put on a show for General Ma Wei, who was guarding the Guangzhou prefecture. Whether or not they could take over the Guangzhou prefecture tonight would depend entirely on his performance. The high-spirited Heavenly King Geng Jun mounted his warhorse. He wore the shiny armor that he seized. Coupled with his tall body, he looked even more majestic. At this moment, he was waiting for the so-called reinforcements to send the signal. Then, he would first lose and then win. Under Geng Jun's anticipation and Huang Yuliang's anticipation, 1,000 Huang bandits disguised as the Southern Ming reinforcements walked up a hill behind them. According to the previous plan, they needed to rush down the hill with torches. They would take the lead to defeat Geng Jun's troops and create the impression that the Southern Ming reinforcements had won. This way, Ma Wei in the city would be fooled. When they left the city to attack, the Huang bandits would take the opportunity to enter the city and take over the Guangzhou prefecture. The fake reinforcements came up the hillside step by step. In order to hide their strategic goal, they didn't even light torches. As a result, there were always people bumping into each other in the dark and getting some minor injuries, which led to waves of curses. They're here. Yang Qindong was on the hill. When he saw the bandits rushing over, he knew that Zhu Fangyong's plan had worked. At this point, everyone could definitely see that Zhu Fangyong was a spy that Yang Qindong had planted among the Huang bandits. The original plan was to convince Huang Yuliang to join them. Otherwise, if it didn't work, then they could only attack by force. At that time, with the advanced firearms, they would not be at a disadvantage. The bandits coming up the hill was enough to show that Zhu Fangyong's plan had worked. Since the plan to beat them at their own game had worked, Yang Qindong did not hold back anymore. He knew that the opportunity was here. He immediately ordered Tiger's Mane, who was lying on the ground, send the signal flare. Everyone, attack. Pong pong pong. 3 different colored signal flare flew into the sky. At this moment, not only did the 800 Yang soldiers on the hill see it clearly, even General Ma Wei, who was on the Guangzhou Prefecture city wall, saw it clearly. 3 flares. The moment he saw the signal flare into the sky, Ma Wei became excited. This was the signal that Yang Qindong had discussed with him. Once they saw the 3 flares in the sky, it meant that the southern Ming reinforcements had arrived. For safety reasons, Ma Wei did not immediately give the order to attack. Instead, he told the deputy general to gather the troops. Then, he stood on the city wall and closely observed the movements of the bandits below. At the same time, Huang Yuliang also saw the 3 flares. A bad feeling crept into his heart. He was very clear that his army did not have such a weapon. What did it mean? Who fired it? What did it mean? The main force of the southern Ming army was surrounded in the Guangzhou prefecture and could not come out. There were also no scouts who reported that the southern Ming reinforcements had arrived. Who was the one who made such a commotion? Of course, Huang Yuliang didn't know that the scouts he sent out were all wiped out by the Yang faction's new army, abbreviated as Yang Army or Yang Family Army. With firearms that could take a person's life from a few hundred feet away and telescopes that could see very far, how could the scouts of the bandits be a match for them? Often, they did not even see their opponents before they were killed by bullets that came from God knows where. Huang Yuliang did not know what was going on. The Alliance army also did not know what was going on. He was also confused by the 3 flares. However, along the way, his pride of not meeting any opponents made him not take any precautions. Instead, he was still waiting for the fake southern Ming reinforcements to appear so that he could lead his troops to retreat and pretend that they were not a match. After the 3 flares were fired, 3 companies of the Cold Vanguard and 3 auxiliary troops charged out like wild horses. They jumped out of the trenches and charged towards the Huang bandits that were climbing up the mountain. Looking down from above, they were like a hot knife through butter. In addition, they suddenly appeared and caught the enemy off guard. Before the 1,000 Huang bandits could react, arrows flew over like rain. This was the equipment of the auxiliary troops and not the Cold Vanguard. Unless there were special circumstances, they would not use advanced firearms. As such, they could only use crossbows. Fortunately, crossbows were made in the arsenal of Crimson City. In terms of range and accuracy, they were very advanced. The arrows flew over, accompanied by the sound of gunfire. The elite Cold Vanguard finally launched their attack. Under such an attack, most of the Huang bandits did not even see who their opponents were before they fell to the ground dead. The remaining bandits who were lucky enough not to be killed immediately collapsed in an instant. On the battlefield, when the death rate exceeded 20%, there would be signs of collapse. Elite troops would also not exceed 30%. Once this happened, the bandits threw down 300 to 400 corpses. This had already exceeded the maximum ratio of 30%. How could they not collapse? They turned around and ran. At this moment, the bandits who hated their parents for not giving birth to them scrambled down the mountain. Behind them, the distance between the Cold Vanguard and the auxiliary troops was getting closer and closer. For example, the Yang family army had never slacked off in their night training. This caused everyone to be used to the darkness. Even without using torches, they could clearly see the situation outside and make the most appropriate actions. With night vision, they already had a natural advantage. Adding on the sudden attack and the fact that most of the weapons in their hands were long-range weapons, how could these bandits who were only here to fill their stomachs be compared to them? In just one exchange, they had already established the foundation for victory. One chasing and one escaping unfolded on the mountain slope. Very quickly, it affected the Gung army who was waiting at the foot of the mountain. According to the plan, once they were ambushed, they should pretend that they were not a match for the enemy and run away. In fact, the bigger the commotion, the better. Only then would it be more realistic. Thus, when someone saw a figure rushing down the mountain, they turned around and ran. They did not make any movements to resist. Among the troops, Gung Jun commanded the army to retreat in an orderly manner while cursing. What the hell is going on? Why didn't they light a torch for a sneak attack? How could they let Ma Wei fall for their trap? General, why don't we shout and shout? This way, we won't be afraid that the Southern Ming army on the city wall will fall for our trap. One of his subordinates suggested. That's right. That's how it should be. Gung Jun nodded in agreement. Soon after, he had someone announce his order loudly. He rode his warhorse and shouted, "Everyone, raise your torches and shout for this daddy. The louder you shout, the better." Gung Jun personally commanded the middle troops. "The shouts of Ming army's reinforcements are here. Quickly run." Were like echoes in the valley. Looking from afar, it really gave people the feeling that they had encountered a sneak attack. Caught off guard, the camp was in chaos. However, as the Yang family army rushed down the mountain, the chaos became more and more realistic. Under the protection of a few of his subordinates, Gung Jun commanded the soldiers under him to create a bigger commotion. Just as he was doing all this, a soldier who ran to his side suddenly fell to the ground. Along with the fall, there was a thick smell of blood that assaulted their noses. Chapter 372. As the leader of the 4 heavenly kings under Huang Yuliang, Gung Jun was someone who had fought on the battlefield before. He was also quite familiar with the aura of the human body. When he suddenly smelled this aura, his expression froze for a moment before he couldn't help but shout, "What are you doing? It's just an act. Who told you to really kill people?" Just as he finished speaking, the sound of firecrackers being set off rang out. Following this explosion, a personal guard who was standing beside him fell to the ground. He only twitched twice before blood seeped out from his chest. He was no longer breathing. "Ah, you dare to kill this daddy's personal guard? All of you must die." Seeing the guard who had followed him for a long time die in front of him for no reason, Gung Jun couldn't help but shout in anger. "General, the situation isn't right. The situation isn't right." A guard saw his companion being killed and was also very surprised, but his mind was still clear. If it was only a bandit soldier being killed, it could be said that it was a misunderstanding. But now, even the general's personal guard was killed. This was no longer something that could be casually explained with words. Gung Jun naturally felt that the situation wasn't right. They didn't light the torches as planned and rushed down much earlier than planned. What was worse was that the speed of the so-called Southern Ming reinforcements rushing down the mountain was too fast. It was so fast that it seemed like they were going to put their lives on the line. Looking at all these, it didn't seem like an act. As for the reason, Gung Jun didn't know for a moment. However, he had fought with the Southern Ming army several times and concluded a good experience. That was, if the situation wasn't right, escape was the best strategy. Retreat. Quickly retreat with this general. Feeling that the situation was out of his control, Gung Jun felt that his life was in danger. He immediately made the decision to retreat from the battlefield. He had a warhorse under him and presumably, his escape speed would be faster than the others. Having a warhorse would indeed increase one's mobility on the battlefield, but at the same time, it would also make one an easy target in the eyes of others. This was because being able to ride a warhorse often meant that one's status was noble and different. Just like now, when Gung Jun shouted to retreat, he saw a black shadow suddenly fly up. Then, he felt his right eye being hit by a punch. The intense pain caused him to fall from his horse. Then, while he was still angrily enduring the pain in his right eye, he felt his chest tighten, and the strength in his body dissipated. It was the feeling of a blade piercing into his body. Gung Jun had once been injured on the battlefield, and he had felt the same way back then. But this time, the feeling was deeper than the last time. The pain caused him to instantly widen his eyes. However, at the same time, a few swords were in front of him. The closest one was only an arm's length away from his chest. At this moment, Peng Yu's eyes were wide open. No one could be indifferent in the face of death. At this moment, the scene of the wild beast in the mountain being killed by him appeared in his mind. Bang, bang, bang. Suddenly, several gunshots rang out. The bandits who were surrounding Peng Yu and were about to attack him fell to the ground. The pressure of death suddenly disappeared. A feeling of rebirth rushed into Peng Yu's heart. "Brother, are you okay?" A large hand reached over and was in front of Peng Yu. The person who came was the battalion commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front, Chun Bo. He was the one who saw the danger here. When he saw that someone seemed to be attacking an auxiliary soldier, he led a few other Cold Front soldiers to shoot and eliminate the enemy. Seeing that it was the elites of the Cold Front, Peng Yu knew that he was fine. He looked at the 2 bars and 1 star insignia on Chun Bo's shoulder. He immediately reached out his right hand to hold Chun Bo's hand and stood up. "Thank you for your help, Chief. Peng Yu can't thank you enough." Battalion Commander, the enemy's leader, Gung Jun, is dead. At this moment, a Cold Front soldier's voice rang out. Then, Gung Jun's still warm body was carried over. Before the battle, all the Cold Front soldiers saw the portraits of the important leaders of the Yellow Bandit Army. Naturally, this included the leader of the 4 Heavenly Kings, Gung Jun. That was how the Cold Front soldiers recognized him. When the body was brought in front of him, Chun Bo examined it carefully. It was indeed Gung Jun. He smiled and said to Peng Yu, "Your luck is not bad. You're even braver. You actually killed the leader of the 4 Heavenly Kings of the Yellow Bandit Army. Alright, what's your name?" Peng Yu never thought that he would kill the leader of the 4 Heavenly Kings of the Yellow Bandit Army, Gung Jun. He only felt that his luck was not bad. His face was flushed with excitement as he said, "Reporting to Battalion Commander, I am from the 3rd Company of Auxiliary Soldiers. My name is Peng Yu." "Good, Peng Yu. You've done a great service. I will report this matter to the higher-ups and record your merit. As for now, the battle is not over yet. You still have to fight bravely. You're quite skilled. Stay by my side for now. That way we can look out for each other." Chun Bo looked at Peng Yu with satisfaction as he spoke in an appreciative and caring tone. "Yes, I will listen to Battalion Commander's orders." To be able to fight alongside Cold Front was his goal ever since he joined the army. Now that he could fulfill his wish, why would he reject it? Gung Jun was dead. Chun Bo chopped off Gung Jun's head and hung it on his spear. He seized his horse and began to run through the army. As he ran, he shouted to Cold Front beside him, "Gung Jun has been executed. If the rest of you don't surrender immediately, you will be spared from death. Those who resist will be killed. Gung Jun is dead. Those who surrender will live. Those who resist will die." Instantly, shouts rang out from all directions. These shouts were like waves that rushed outwards and quickly reached the ears of the Yellow Bandit soldiers. The 5,000 soldiers that were prepared here were just making a symbolic retreat. However, when they heard the shouts, especially when they saw Gung Jun's head beside the torch on the war horse, their minds went blank. Didn't they say that the retreat was an act to lure the Southern Ming army out of the city? Then why did General Gung Jun die? Wasn't this acting a little too realistic? Everyone's thoughts were in chaos. In addition to the sounds of crossbow arrows flying through the air, more and more Yellow Bandit soldiers were killed and fell to the ground. Under such a one-sided situation, some of the great Ming citizens who originally wanted to earn a living felt fear and terror. Thus, the first person to kneel and surrender was the first to do so. Everything was afraid of setting an example. Once the first person knelt and surrendered, there was soon a second and a third. The originally disorderly and untrained Yellow Bandit soldiers eventually fell one by one. Occasionally, there would be some who wanted to stand up and resist. However, as soon as they stood up, blood would splatter in front of their chests. After being hit by a bullet, they would fall to the ground and become corpses. When everyone realized that those who stood up would die and those who knelt would live, no one dared to stand up. This resulted in a black mass of people kneeling on the ground. There were simply too many captives. There were at least 2,000 of them. Battalion Commander Chen Bo had no choice but to leave behind a squad of Cold Front and a platoon of auxiliary soldiers to watch over the captives. Then, he led the other soldiers and charged towards the Yellow Bandit camp. Chapter 373. The same thing happened on the left and right wings. A large number of Yellow Bandit prisoners knelt on the ground. There were also some Lung Feng soldiers and auxiliary soldiers who continued to charge towards the main camp. Huang Yuliang was pacing back and forth in his tent. At this moment, his heart was burning with anxiety. The 3 flares in the sky made him feel that something was wrong. However, he still felt that it was a coincidence. After all, he did not receive any news about the arrival of the Southern Ming Empire's reinforcements. Furthermore, he still had 80,000 soldiers in his hands. Report. Just as Huang Yuliang was feeling uneasy, the curtains of the tent were pulled open, revealing Zhu Fangyong's face. General Zhu, how did it go? Huang Yuliang asked anxiously when he saw who it was. Young master, it's a mess. Everything is a mess. There are rumors that General Geng Jun was killed. The army is in a mess now. Zhu Fangyong said as he entered the tent. Geng Jun was killed? Hearing this news, Huang Yuliang shook his head instinctively. That's impossible. General Geng has 5,000 soldiers by his side. They are all elites. Furthermore, he was only in charge of pretending to retreat. How could anything happen to him? Zhu Fangyong naturally did not agree with Huang Yuliang's description of elites. Compared to the elite Lung Feng soldiers, these Yellow Bandit soldiers could not even compare to a single finger of the elite Lung Feng soldiers. However, Zhu Fangyong, who still had important responsibilities, had no choice but to suppress his thoughts. He said obediently, Yes, General Geng is surrounded by elites. I believe that someone at the front lines must have spread the news. However, the army is in a mess now. I'm afraid that anything can happen. For your safety, I hope that young master can leave the tent first. Leave the main tent? Why? Huang Yuliang shook his head with a puzzled expression. He had 80,000 soldiers. Even if something happened, he still had the advantage. How could he retreat just because he encountered a problem? As if he knew that Huang Yuliang would do this, Zhu Fangyong shook his head and took 2 big steps forward. He said, Young master, I'm sorry to offend you. Then he raised his right arm and slapped the back of Huang Yuliang's neck. Chen Bo and the others quickly rushed towards the Yellow Bandit army. Under the cover of the night, they weaved through the battlefield. Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers split into groups of 3 and 5. They shot and killed the enemies in front of them with their spears and crossbows while shouting, Geng Jun is dead. Young Master Huang has escaped. This caused the Huang bandit army to fall into chaos. Shouts rang out from all directions. Some of the leaders who believed in young Master Huang immediately led their men to find a path to escape. Some of the leaders who didn't believe in young Master Huang were killed by Lung Feng from a distance. Some of them went to the main tent and found that young Master Huang was indeed missing. Knowing that something was wrong, they decided to flee. In short, without a commanding general in the army, in a state of chaos, the untrained bandit army did not know the general and the soldiers did not know the general. In a state of utter chaos, everyone only cared about running for their lives. How could they organize any decent counterattack? It was at this moment that the final straw that crushed the army appeared. General Ma Wei, who had been determined not to come out of the Guangzhou prefecture, led the remaining 2,000 men and charged out. The moment the Southern Ming army appeared, the bandit army became even more chaotic. Countless people trampled on each other, and groups of people knelt down and surrendered. Nanjing, the capital of the Southern Ming dynasty. After a period of renovation, the palace that was originally here looked majestic. The newly renovated Political Affairs Hall became the place where Zhu Qizhen met the important officials. The sky was already bright. A few important officials arrived at the Political Affairs Hall early in the morning, each of them feeling uneasy. In the Southern Ming dynasty, there was a large court session every 6 days and a small court session every 2 days. The so-called large court session was a court session that all officials of the 4th rank and above in the capital had to attend without any special reasons. At that time, everyone could report to the emperor any difficult matters that happened at hand for everyone to discuss and deal with. The small court session could only be attended by officials of the third and second rank and above. The purpose of the court session was to solve problems. Usually, when the matter was related to someone, that person would be summoned to the hall to meet the emperor. Yesterday was the day of the small court session, but before 5 o'clock in the morning, the eunuchs in the palace went to the various residences to summon them to meet the emperor in the palace. Under such an urgent situation, something important must have happened, causing the important officials to feel uneasy when they entered the political affairs hall. From the looks of it, the officials who attended the small court session were all ministers of the 6 ministries. With such a wide range of influence, it was no wonder that everyone felt uneasy. Some smart people had even guessed something. At this time, the only thing that could make the emperor so anxious was the war in the south. While everyone was guessing and worrying, footsteps came from outside the hall. Accompanied by head eunuch Chao Jixiang, Zhu Qizhen walked into the hall and sat down on the large chair that represented the emperor. After Zhu Qizhen sat down, the officials who came in response to the imperial edict knelt on the ground and said, "This official greets the emperor. May the emperor live for 10,000 years. You may rise." Zhu Qizhen's eyes were like torches as he scanned every important official. Then he said, "Chao Jixiang, quickly pass the 800 li letter that was received in the middle of the night for everyone to see." "Yes." After Chao Jixiang agreed, he carried a wooden box and brought it to the Minister of Personnel, Chen Sun. Even though the 6 ministries seemed to be equal, the Minister of Personnel had always been known as the heavenly official. This was because the appointment and dismissal of the officials in charge was determined by who was one level higher. Chen Sun himself had once been an important official in the cabinet. It was reasonable for him to be the first to know of the news. Chen Sun reached out and opened the wooden box. He took out the letter and quickly skimmed through it. Then, he returned the letter with a serious expression. After him, the Minister of Revenue Wang Zhua and the others also read the 800 li urgent letter. Very quickly, everyone knew of the news in the letter. The hall became much quieter. This seemed to have become some kind of custom. Whenever something big happened, the officials would treat their words like gold. Perhaps they also knew that the more important the matter was, the more they could not easily express their opinions. Otherwise, if they said something wrong, a disaster could befall them. The officials did not say a word. After Zhu Qizhen read the letter, there was a hint of anger in his eyes. He hated the attitude of these important officials who usually spoke of protecting the country and the people. When it came to critical moments, they always protected themselves first and never took the initiative to solve problems for the imperial family. However, the law could not punish the majority. He could not punish anyone just because the important officials did not express their opinions. Since they did not take the initiative to speak, he would call them out one by one. "My dear officials, you have all seen it. The situation in Yunnan is dangerous. The rebel Zhu Huili has received help from Jiaoji. The military commander Liang Luo has died on the battlefield. The situation is very dangerous. Governor Wang of Huguang has come to request for reinforcements. Does everyone have a plan?" The military commander Liang Luo could be considered someone who knew his troops well. However, he still died on the battlefield. This was beyond the expectations of all the officials. Now that the emperor asked for a plan, for a moment, everyone looked at each other. No one dared to say a word. Everyone understood the meaning of Zhu Qizhen's words. Governor Wang of Huguang had asked for reinforcements and good generals. The reinforcements were secondary. After knowing that Jiaoji had agreed to Zhu Huili sending troops, the southern Ming court had begun to mobilize the army. Now, the preparations were more or less complete. The first batch of reinforcements was 50,000 people. Although the number of reinforcements might not reach the initial expectations, if they were used well, they could be of use. As long as the southern Ming had enough time to prepare, they could mobilize and recruit more soldiers. However, choosing the right general was the difficult matter. After the Great Ming had 3 emperors, Emperor Chengzu, Emperor Renzong, and Emperor Xuanzong, the country seemed to be very powerful. However, with the implementation of the strategy of emphasizing civil affairs and belittling military force, there were not many generals that could be used on the battlefield. After the Battle of Tumu Castle, many of the generals that could fight had died. In addition, the Great Ming was divided into the north and south. Now, the number of good generals that Zhu Qizhen could use could be counted on one hand. It had already become a common practice on the battlefield to choose the right general before using the army. Without good generals, no matter how many soldiers were sent, it would be useless. However, how could good generals be the reign of the world that could fall at any time? They had to be experienced in battle. Moreover, only after 100 battles could a good general be produced. Looking at the southern Ming, it was clear that there were no such people. Of course, it was not that there were no generals that could be selected from among the lame. For example, the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, was a person who knew how to fight. However, he was indeed a bit old. He might not be able to withstand the bumpiness and fatigue of the battlefield. Secondly, he was currently in the process of reorganizing the various guard stations and had discovered many problems. If he was transferred away at this time, it could easily cause internal instability. This could shake the foundation of the southern Ming, which was an even more frightening matter. If he could not use Kuang Yi, it would be difficult to choose a good general. This was the reason why Zhu Qizhen had summoned everyone. Zhu Qizhen could not think of any suitable candidates, so he called everyone and asked the important officials to recruit talents. However, this was also difficult for these important officials. Normally, it was easy to recommend someone to a civil official. Everyone would even scramble to arrange their own people. After all, they were governing a city and a region. Even if there were some mistakes, it would not affect the overall situation. At most, they would be labeled as ignorant. However, this was the battlefield. Now that the situation in Yunnan was so critical, if they were not successful in a battle, not only would they die on the battlefield, it could also directly shake the foundation of the southern Ming. This crime was not something that a single person could bear. Knowing the importance of this matter, no one dared to recommend a candidate. Each and every one of the officials pretended to be deaf and mute. As expected, no one was willing to share the burden of state affairs at this critical moment. While Zhu Qizhen was furious, his gaze fell on the Minister of Personnel, Chun Sun. Minister Chun, is there anyone suitable for the Ministry of Personnel that manages the country? Chapter 374. When his name was called, Chun Sun groaned inwardly. However, he knew that he could not run away from his duties. For this reason, he raised his head and said with a bitter expression, "Your Majesty, this subject is mainly responsible for the assessment and appointment of the officials in the various prefectures and the capital. As for the military, this subject is not involved in much and cannot think of a suitable candidate. However, this subject will go back and do a thorough investigation to see if there is anyone who can win the position of a good general." He didn't dare to push the responsibility away directly, but he did express his thoughts in his words. Could be summed up in one sentence. He knew about the transfer of civil officials, but when it came to military affairs, he knew very little. Humph! Zhu Qizhen snorted in displeasure when he knew that Chun Sun was trying to shirk his responsibility. His gaze then fell on the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhua. Beloved official Wang, the Ministry of Revenue is in charge of the nation's finances, as well as the army's provisions and weapons. Do you have any outstanding candidates to recommend to me during the evaluation? Your Majesty, most of the soldiers in the army are the same. There is no one particularly outstanding. This subject really cannot think of anyone at the moment. Wang Zhua braced himself as he spoke. His intention was to tell Zhu Qizhen that he was only in charge of the finances and provisions. Recommending a good general was not part of his duties, so he would not have an answer. After 2 successive ministers found excuses, Zhu Qizhen angrily asked a few other ministers. However, he still did not get any answers. Finally, his gaze fell on the Minister of War, Kuang Yi. Beloved official Kuang, you are in charge of the Ministry of War. Do you have any suitable generals to recommend to me? Asking Kuang Yi was something that could not be helped. Originally, Zhu Qizhen knew that if there really was a suitable candidate, Kuang Yi would have stood up long ago. His lack of action meant that he had no one to recommend. However, at this point he could only try. Kuang Yi, who was asked this question, was much calmer than the other ministers. Replying to Your Majesty, the Ministry of War is currently conducting a self-inspection. For the time being, we haven't found anyone outstanding in leading troops. However, since Your Majesty has asked, this subject recommends the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. He is currently quelling a rebellion in Guangdong. Why not wait for him to resolve the matter there, and then transfer him to Yunnan to take charge? While Kuang Yi was still speaking, Zhu Qizhen's face was already red. He said angrily, "Enough!" After interrupting Kuang Yi, Zhu Qizhen said angrily to Kuang Yi, "Do you know what Guanning, who you sent out to report the situation in Guangdong every day, said? Today is peaceful, the three armies have not moved. Everything is normal. This is Guanying's secret report, and it's the same sentence every day. We can even recite it by heart. Now you say that you want to place your hopes on the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Do you know that you are talking without thinking? Yes, yes. How can Minister Kuang mention the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? The matter in Guangdong was caused by a group of bandits, and most of them were untrained rebels. They have no combat ability at all. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage, who is known as the God of War, fears the enemy like a tiger. If he is transferred to Yunnan, who knows how afraid he will be? It is better not to say such things in the future to avoid being ridiculed by others." The Minister of Rights, Lu De, stood up and spoke as if he was criticizing Yang Qindong for not doing his job well. Yang Qindong did not give face to Lu De because of the matter with Hangzhou's prefectural magistrate, Qi Bushen. Lu De held a grudge. After that, he tried to obstruct Yang Shan's diplomatic mission to northern Ming. However, things didn't go as he expected. He was called over by Zhu Qizhen and reprimanded. He had long been dissatisfied. Now, even the emperor was scolding Yang Qindong for not doing his job well. How could he not put a foot in it? Towards the grudges between Lu De and Yang Qindong, Kuang Yi, who understood the grudges between Lu De and Yang Qindong well, naturally knew that the other side was venting his anger. Thus, he put on an expression of disagreement as he said, "The Duke of Loyalty and Courage indeed did not gain any merit, but the situation in Guangdong did not expand either. Besides, the situation on the battlefield is ever-changing. Not moving today does not mean not moving tomorrow. Who knows what the outcome will be? I have confidence in the Duke of Loyalty and Courage." Is that so? Then I hope that Minister Kuang has a good eye for people. I also hope that the Duke of Beiming does not disappoint. Lu De knew very well that he didn't have much say in military matters. He had already expressed his opinion, so there was no need to make things difficult for Kuang Yi. Thus, he began to withdraw his hand. "Enough," Zhu Qizhen said angrily. Seeing that the officials had no good generals to recommend and were instead arguing, he waved his hand. "Everyone, go back and think about the matter of generals. If there is a suitable candidate, I will not look at seniority and promote him." Even without looking at seniority, one could see Zhu Qizhen's anxiety. The officials all knelt on the ground and said that they would think about it carefully and choose a suitable candidate. The siege of Guangzhou had been resolved. Yang Qindong also met with the commander of the Guangdong Guards, General Ma Wei, at the foot of the city. However, information was not developed. It would take a few days for news of the battle here to reach Nanjing. General Ma Wei greets the imperial envoy. What was different from the last time they met was that Ma Wei's salute this time was very respectful. Could be seen that he was sincere. Although under the Ming dynasty system, military officials were usually half a head lower than civil officials, as a rank 3 commander of the guards, his power was not small. At least in the entire Guangdong, the only person who could suppress him was the administrative secretary Liu Youfu. Even the original inspector Jia Qing only had a higher rank than him. Most of the time, the two of them were in different positions and did not need to lower their heads when they met. Now, Ma Wei's respect for Yang Qindong was not only because of his identity as an imperial envoy, but more importantly because of the victory of this battle. Starting from the night, it did not end until noon of the second day. The yellow bandits were already defeated. Their leader, Huang Yuliang, escaped in the chaos. The leader of the 4 heavenly kings, Gung Jun, was killed in front of the formation. Other than that, more than 30 leaders were either killed, injured, or captured. In this battle, there were more than 30,000 prisoners. Adding those who died in the battle, especially those who trampled on each other in the chaos, there were close to 10,000 people. Thus, more than half of the original 80,000 yellow bandits were heavily injured. Not only did they lose the ability to surround the Guangzhou government, the rest of them had all escaped like stray dogs. This method came from Yang Qindong's hands. As a witness to the entire matter, how could Ma Wei not be convinced? As for the resentment of Yang Qindong ordering him to defend the Guangzhou government for 10 days and losing soldiers, he had long forgotten it completely. Ma Wei's face was full of acceptance. Yang Qindong did not find it strange and only replied lightly, "General Ma has contributed greatly in this battle. I will mention it in the following battle report. However, the battle is not over yet. The battlefield still needs to be cleaned up and a large number of prisoners still need to be monitored. General Ma is more familiar with this place. As for how to mobilize the bailiffs and even the common people in the Guangzhou government to help, all of this will depend on you." Yang Qindong spoke politely and Ma Wei immediately agreed happily. "Please do not worry, Imperial Envoy. I will go to the city to mobilize soon. I think the manpower will be replenished very quickly." "Very good." Yang Qindong first nodded in satisfaction. Then he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Right, although we won this battle, we lost some men. In order to better attack the yellow bandits and achieve the goal of eliminating them, I suggest that we pick some strong men from these prisoners for our use. With enough soldiers, we can win consecutive battles and restore the stability of Guangdong." This was a commonly used method during the War of Liberation. This was also one of the reasons why our army was growing larger and larger and why our victory was becoming more and more fruitful. Pick prisoners and replenish soldiers? Hearing this, Ma Wei raised his head in surprise. Clearly, this was something he had never thought of. Just as he was puzzled, General Guaning also rode over from not far away. However, when he was still a few dozen feet away from Yang Qindong, he reined in his horse and jumped off. Leading the horse in front of Yang Qindong was also a sign of respect. Speaking of which, the results of this battle shocked Guaning and made him truly convinced. Previously, when he wanted to compete in leg strength with Yang Qindong, he had lost. Guaning had a feeling that this young imperial envoy might be able to bring him a pleasant surprise. What he did not expect was that not only would there be a pleasant surprise, the results would be so great. In less than a day, they defeated the yellow bandits and severely damaged their foundation. Not only did they resolve the siege of Guangzhou Prefecture, there had long been news that the yellow bandits had retreated in the direction of Zhaoqing Prefecture. Once they entered the city, they holed up and tightly closed the city gates. It was clear that this battle had scared them out of their wits and greatly damaged their arrogance. After this battle, presumably, the situation in Guangdong would be greatly alleviated. Now that there was hope for his mission to be completed, Guaning walked over with a glowing face. When he saw Yang Qindong, his attitude was even more respectful. "Imperial Envoy, the food has been delivered. When do you think you can let the army eat?" "There is no rush for this matter." Yang Qindong looked at the approaching Guaning with a slight smile. He then pointed at Ma Wei and said, "Just now, I said that we do not have enough soldiers. I was wondering if we could pick some strong young men from the prisoners and temporarily send them to the army. However, it seems that General Ma does not agree." "No, I was only thinking that these people were originally yellow bandits. Even if they were captured because they were not a match for us, we do not know if they can truly be used by us. That is why I have some misgivings." Ma Wei saw that Yang Qindong seemed to be dissatisfied with him and immediately opened his mouth to explain. In that way, he had completely regarded Yang Qindong as a superior. Chapter 375. This was the difference between a general and a civil official. If it was a civil official, even if you showed great talent, it would be hard for the other party to be convinced. Even if he was full of flattery on the surface, It was hard to tell whether or not he would hate him out of jealousy and secretly do bad things in the dark. A general was different. Often, the better the general was at war, the more straightforward his personality was. This kind of person would call himself a hero and value heroes more. Once he met someone who was more powerful than him, not only would he be convinced, but he would also feel a sense of appreciation for that person. At this time, the only difference between the two was the difference in the master he served. Today, Ma Wei admired and respected Yang Qindong. Hearing him say that he did not support the idea of using captives as soldiers, he had to explain. Using captives as soldiers? Guaning was shocked when he heard this. Obviously, he had never thought of this idea before and was caught off guard. Yes, you can say that it's using captives as soldiers. Yang Qindong saw that the two of them didn't understand, so he explained, "The two of you, to be honest, with the amount of military power we have, it's really impossible for us to really quell the yellow bandits. If the other party only retreated and defended the city, with our little military power, we will not be able to display any advantage. This time we were able to win, but one was fast and the other was strange. But what if the other party is prepared?" Yang Qindong looked at Guaning and Ma Wei and continued, "If they are prepared, the lack of military power is our weakness. They only need to fight a war of attrition with us. Even if they use 10 people to exchange for one of our lives, I'm afraid we can't afford it." There was no need for Yang Qindong to explain the weakness of having too little military power. Guaning and Ma Wei could see it clearly. But what could they do? They had transferred all the soldiers they could from Guangdong. Now, they did not have any extra power to fight a decisive battle with the yellow bandits. However, Yang Qindong's idea was not bad. If they could really use it, it would be a good way to expand their strength. At the very least, it would be a good way to protect themselves. However, using prisoners of war as soldiers was unprecedented in the Ming dynasty. This made things difficult for Guaning and Ma Wei. Seeing that the two of them only lowered their heads and didn't say anything, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, Yang Qindong chuckled. "Forget it, I won't make things difficult for you. Presumably, the two of you know that, as an imperial envoy, I have the authority to use some battlefield resources. Since this is the case, these people have been temporarily recruited by me. In the future, you can write in detail in the battle reports. All the blame will be shouldered by this imperial envoy. It has nothing to do with you two. You can put your hearts into your stomachs." As soon as Yang Qindong said this, Guaning and Ma Wei heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Although the emperor's decree did not explicitly state that Yang Qindong could use all the resources on the battlefield, but this time the mercenaries were hired without any payment. For this reason, there was indeed news from the higher-ups that in order to make up for the Duke of Loyalty, he did indeed have the right to share the battlefield resources. Just like how he punished Lady Jia and Han Qing before, it was clear proof. Since he had this kind of power and prisoners of war were also a type of battlefield resource, it was possible for him to use this as an excuse to use prisoners of war as soldiers. Since they had no right to object, if anything happened in the future, it would have nothing to do with them. How could they not let out a sigh of relief? Since the imperial envoy has said so, then let's do as you have said. However, I still want to remind you that no matter how brave and loyal the prisoners of war are, their loyalty is always very little. You still need to be on guard at all times, Ma Wei said in a concerned tone. Earlier, he did not express his opinion and even had a faint intention of opposing. He did not know if the imperial envoy would be angry at him. Now that there was a chance to flatter him, he would not let it go. Since Ma Wei had expressed his opinion, Guaning was not willing to fall behind. He immediately expressed his opinion. "General Ma's words are correct. I also completely agree." "Good." Seeing that the two of them had both expressed their opinions, Yang Qindong also let out a breath. "Then the matter is settled like this. I will leave a portion of people to join the army, but most of the prisoners of war will still be returned to you. Just arrange for them to be watched over." The matter was finally settled. Yang Qindong bid farewell to Guaning and Ma Wei and called over the commander of the second group of the Cold Front, Luo Pe, commander of the auxiliary group, Lu Zhua, as well as Kong Jie and Song Jie, the two political commissars. The matter of the prisoners of war has been settled. You can choose the right people first. However, remember, you must do things according to the rules. You cannot accept anyone who has serious problems. Otherwise, whoever makes a mistake will be held responsible. Hearing that they could expand the army, although it was only some prisoners of war, Luopa and Lu Zhuo were both very happy. Just now, they had taken some time to take a look. Among the prisoners of war of the Yellow Bandits, there was no lack of good seedlings with strong bodies. If they were taught well and could be used, they would probably become good soldiers not long after. As for who could be accepted and who could not be accepted, they had long made plans. In addition, the political commissar had brought along a group of battalion-level instructors and company-level instructors to assist. Presumably, there would not be a big problem. Since there was not a big problem, Luopa and the other three all agreed with faces full of excitement. Then, they began to choose the talents they could use from the prisoners of war. Luopa and the others went to choose the good soldiers. Yang Chendong also tested the soldiers under his command. For example, Peng Yu was the first person he needed to test. In this battle, Peng Yu had contributed greatly. He had personally killed the head of the Yellow Bandits' 4 heavenly kings, Gung Jun. This kind of contribution would not be ignored in any army. Thus, Peng Yu was personally received by Yang Chendong. In a quiet military tent at the edge of the battlefield, Yang Chendong saw Peng Yu, who was half kneeling on the ground. "You are Peng Yu. I remember that your leg strength is not bad. You also performed very well in this battle." Being called over by Yang Chendong, Peng Yu was more or less excited. He had already seen that this person's identity was not simple. Now that he was praised by this person, he was naturally unable to contain his joy. "Thank you for the praise. Everything is what Peng Yu should have done. No need to call me some chief. You can just call me the 6th young master." Looking at the proud Peng Yu, Yang Chendong felt that this was a good seedling. He immediately revealed his identity with a smile. Sixth young master. Suddenly hearing Yang Chendong call him by his name, Peng Yu was first stunned. Then his eyes widened. His entire body seemed to tremble. His knees went soft and with a plop, he knelt on the ground. "Greetings, 6th young master. I did not know your identity and neglected you before. Please punish me." It was no wonder that Peng Yu was so excited. In Crimson City, who did not know the name of the 6th young master? Many people had even seen his true appearance. However, because Peng Yu had entered Crimson City late, he did not have the chance to see him. This had always been a regret in his heart. Now that he was finally able to see the person's face, and at such a close distance, it could almost be described as a private meeting. How could he not be excited on such an occasion? How could he not kneel on the ground in indescribable excitement? Get up. Seeing Peng Yu's reaction, Yang Chendong could not help but laugh out loud. This person's reaction was enough to prove that he did not know his identity. However, to be able to perform so well on the battlefield was enough to prove that he was a hard-working person. Such a character was most suitable to join the cold front. "Yes, thank you, 6th young master." When Peng Yu heard Yang Chendong's words, he immediately got up from the ground in joy. Then, he stood in a standard military posture in front of Yang Chendong. "Not bad. You are spirited and your eyes are spirited. You are a good seedling. However, do you know why I told you my identity as the 6th young master?" Yang Chendong looked at Peng Yu, who was standing tall and straight in front of him, and asked with a smile, "Forgive me for being stupid. I do not know." Peng Yu thought hard for a moment before shaking his head in distress. "Ha ha ha." Seeing Peng Yu's naive look, Yang Chendong could not help but laugh again. Then, he looked at Tiger's Mane beside him and said, "Tell him." "Yes." Tiger's Mane replied. Then, he looked at Peng Yu and said, "Remember, anyone who can be called the 6th young master has the right to join the cold front. This is also the cold front's secret. Now you have it. Do you understand?" Peng Yu was not stupid. On the contrary, he was very quick-witted. Otherwise, he would not have been unscathed after fighting with those wild beasts in the mountains for so many years. Now that he heard Tiger's Mane's words, he immediately understood something. He said excitedly, "Thank you, sixth young master, for your promotion and training. Peng Yu will perform well in future battles and will not disappoint the sixth young master." Wait, Yang Chendong interrupted Peng Yu's words of gratitude. Instead, he shook his head and said, "The rule to join the Cold Front was set by me in the beginning. Since there were rules, everyone had to abide by them. Although your performance is not bad and you have gained the recognition of the young master, you still have to go through the assessment. As for the combat assessment, you have already submitted a satisfactory answer. However, how is your education level? You must know that as an elite member of the Cold Front, you must be literate. You must be able to write and recognize maps. Which one do you know?" When the question of education level was brought up, Peng Yu's face flashed with a troubled expression. Yang Chendong saw this and could not help but feel a little disappointed. He had to admit that Peng Yu's performance on the battlefield was not bad. He knew that Peng Yu was originally a hunter and had only joined the auxiliary forces for half a year. However, based on the principle of not sticking to one type of talent, he decided to give Peng Yu a chance and make an exception for the assessment in advance. However, if Peng Yu was really illiterate, he would not be able to join the Cold Front. This rule could not be broken by him. Otherwise, if there was a first, there would be a second. It would not be long before the Cold Front would be ruled by a group of martial artists. Such a team might be able to perform well for a while, but it was impossible for them to last long. An army without education and knowledge was destined to not go far. Chapter 376. Just as Yang Chendong was feeling disappointed, Peng Yu answered, "Sixth young master? I can read a few words, but I haven't been studying for long, so I don't know many words. I don't know how to read maps either." "You can read?" He did not consider whether Peng Yu knew how to read maps. Maps were usually used to assess military officers. As long as Peng Yu had some knowledge, he could join the Cold Vanguard. As for whether Peng Yu could have a higher level of knowledge, there would be plenty of opportunities for him to learn in the future. Peng Yu was young, so there would be plenty of opportunities. "Yes, I can read." Peng Yu was quite confident when he said that. Back in Crimson City, Peng Yu's parents and sister found a teacher to teach him for the sake of his future. Peng Yu was not a scholar, but he could still read. "All right, find a book and let him read it." Yang Chendong nodded. He believed that no one would dare to lie to him about something like this, so he spoke to Tiger's Mane beside him. Soon an ancient book was found. The words 3-character classic were written on the cover. It was more suitable for a newbie. Peng Yu took the ancient book with some fear, but when he read the first line, his face was filled with a confident smile. He had read these 3 words before, but if it was just a test, he wouldn't be afraid at all. Man's nature is good at birth. Similar in nature, different in habits. If you do not teach, your nature will change. The way of teaching is to specialize. Peng Yu was literate and could write. Although his handwriting was not beautiful, he had already met the rules set by Yang Chendong. It should be known that, in the current environment, not everyone was qualified to be literate. Therefore, he immediately broke the rules and was promoted from an auxiliary soldier to a Cold Vanguard, becoming an existence that many envied. However, Peng Yu's knowledge was still lacking. At least, he did not know how to read maps, so he was only a normal Cold Vanguard soldier. He was not given any official position. However, as long as he worked hard in the future, once he had more knowledge and learned how to read maps, he would become an officer sooner or later. Even if he didn't become an officer, Peng Yu was already quite satisfied. Being able to join the Cold Front after only being an auxiliary soldier for half a year was something he never dared to imagine. Not to mention, this exceptional promotion was hosted by the 6th young master himself. Just this point alone was enough to make him proud for the rest of his life. Peng Yu happily left the tent. Other than being ordered not to tell the auxiliary soldiers that Yang Chendong was the 6th young master, he had also become a member of the Cold Vanguard that everyone envied. Soon after, the news spread like wildfire among the auxiliary soldiers. At this moment, there were many envious people. Everyone was holding back a wave of energy in their hearts. That was, they had to perform well in the following battles and strive for the opportunity to be promoted. In order to win a battle, morale was a must. Proper command was also a must. However, there was also a standard requirement for the number of soldiers. For example, if 100 people met 10,000 people, how difficult would it be to win? This was the disadvantage brought about by the lack of numbers. Although Crimson City had developed rapidly, its foundation was still too weak. The time it had been established was also too short, resulting in a lack of manpower. Now that there was a chance to expand its strength, both Commander Luope and Commander Lujua would not let go of this opportunity. Immediately, with the support of the two commanders, the political commissars of the two regiments led a group of political personnel and started to get busy. Groups of strong captives were brought in front of them to register and understand the situation. Although they could use this opportunity to expand the army, there were still rules to be followed. The first step was a strict background check. Register them carefully and see if they have any family members living outside. If they're alone, register them strictly. Not only do we have to listen to them, but we also have to ask them to name at least 2 of their captive friends. We have to verify whether they are right or wrong. As for those who can't be found, put them aside first. We can't accept them if they don't have a clear background. If they are alone, we have to understand how they ended up like this. Why did their family members leave them? Whether they were oppressed by the Yellow Bandits or the Ming Army. We have to find out everything clearly. Ask them seriously if they were literate, if they have learned martial arts, who their master is. We have to register all of these clearly. Questions after questions were asked by the 2 political commissars, which became the criteria to determine which captives were suitable to be recruited into the army and which were not. While these political personnel were doing their work, Guanying's logistical support was also effective. Even Ma Wei was very cooperative. Some of the rich families in Guangzhou were grateful that Yang Qindong led the troops to save them, so they took out silver to buy meat and wine to reward the victorious troops. Lung Feng and the auxiliary troops were able to eat their fill for a few days. Food was the most important thing to the people. Initially, some of the captives were not cooperative with the various inquiries. However, when they saw that anyone who cooperated would be rewarded with meat, everyone's enthusiasm was aroused. Some people didn't even wait for others to take the initiative to ask, and like pouring beans out of a bamboo tube, they told everything they knew about themselves and the people around them. All they wanted was to get a few more pieces of meat. These people were called the Yellow Bandits, but most of them were made up of commoners who did not have a livelihood. To them, they did not particularly care whether they rebelled or not. As long as they could fill their stomachs with someone, they would follow that person. For these people, the temptation of meat was naturally great. Ever since they saw this, the Yang family army's politicians had made full use of this point. It was because of the large amount of delicious food that their work progressed very quickly. Thanks to this quick and efficient work, many captives with suitable conditions were selected. After a short period of ideological work, they became part of the temporary auxiliary troops. Temporary auxiliary troops were the difference between them and real auxiliary troops. They were the lowest level of existence. But even so, only about 2,000 people were selected from the 30,000 captives. These people were quickly divided and assigned to the auxiliary troops camp, where the old led the new. This was the experience of the Yang army's rapid development. Ba Daojiang was one of these temporary auxiliary troops. At first, this name did not sound like a person's name, but more like a place's name. However, it was actually a nickname given by the people of the underworld. This person's skin was slightly dark, and he was not very tall. However, the muscles on his body seemed to be in an explosive state. At first glance, one could tell that he was not an ordinary commoner, but a martial artist. In fact, Ba Daojiang had been practicing martial arts since young. After he finished his apprenticeship, he mingled in the underworld. When he first started out, because he did not have much experience in the underworld, he offended someone and was almost assassinated. After that, he began to chase after the real culprit. He chased after the culprit for 3 days and 3 nights. During that time, he passed by 8 different rivers of different sizes. In the end, He killed the culprit who had assassinated him. After that, he became known as Ba Daojiang. As time passed, he began to forget his original name and began to call himself Ba Daojiang. This time, he was originally wandering around Guangdong, fighting for justice and looking for a future that belonged to him. Coincidentally, the city of Wuzhou that he was previously in had been attacked by the Huang bandits. He was trapped in the city and had joined this group by some strange coincidence. After wandering around the underworld, he had seen many things. This made Ba Daojiang dislike some of the local officials of the Ming dynasty. They often used their power to bully others and took advantage of the commoners. Just based on the number of people that he had seen, he did not know how many families had been destroyed by the officials. After losing confidence in the Ming dynasty, Ba Daojiang joined the Huang bandit army to see if they could really bring new hope to the commoners. However, when he attacked Zhaoqing Prefecture, he was once again disappointed by the burning, killing, and looting. He had the intention to leave, but before he found a good place to go, he forced himself to stay in the Huang bandit army. Unexpectedly, during the attack on Guangzhou Prefecture, he was sleeping in the barracks when there was a commotion outside. When he got dressed and came out of the barracks, he saw the Huang bandit army fleeing in all directions. In order to save his own life, Ba Daojiang was prepared to escape. In the process of escaping, he even injured 2 of his auxiliary soldiers. However, he was eventually stopped by the elites from the outside. When Ba Daojiang saw more than 10 bandits being killed by firearms from afar, he wisely chose not to take the lead. In the end, he followed the crowd and became a captive. There were so many captives, and Ba Daojiang was only one in 30,000 of them. In addition, he hadn't done anything outrageous, so he wasn't in a hurry. He only thought that the law couldn't punish the masses. In the end, these people would still be dismissed, because even if they wanted to be locked up in prison, there wasn't a prison that could hold so many people. As he waited patiently, he was attracted by the meat that Lung Feng took out. Ba Daojiang did not have any other hobbies other than good wine and meat. How could he not be moved by the delicious food in front of him? As such, in order to achieve his goal, he revealed some of his situation. As he did not have any relatives and did not know where his parents were, he became an important target for investigation. After finding out from his friends that he did not join the Huang bandit army for long and did not do anything to harm the civilians, he was selected to be a temporary auxiliary soldier and lived a life of meat. There was no free lunch in the world. After eating delicious meat, Ba Daojiang and the other temporary auxiliary soldiers would be called for a meeting every night. Lung Feng and 2 auxiliary soldiers would be in charge of the meeting. The content was for everyone to talk about their past and history, about the injustice they had seen, and about the grievances they had suffered. At first, Ba Daojiang didn't know why he said all this. But when he saw some people being encouraged to talk about their own stories, and some talking about how their loved ones died under the Ming dynasty's corrupt and deceitful policies, or were forced to die or starve to death, tears streamed down his face. He was heartbroken. Chapter 377. Every time someone did something like this, it would cause the other temporary soldiers to shed tears as well. From these words, they seemed to recall some of the painful experiences they had gone through. The grievance meeting was a method of training soldiers that Yang Chendong had proposed. By letting everyone vent their grievances, not only would it allow them to vent their frustrations, it would also shorten the distance between them. As time went by, everyone naturally became closer to each other. This change happened unknowingly, and when some people realized it, they had already fallen in love with this atmosphere. Here, not only was there unity and love between comrades, there was also mutual respect. No one would be discriminated against because of their low birth. More importantly, they could eat meat every day, and it was 3 meals a day. In a short period of time, they were all fed white and fat. Ba Daojiang was also affected by this atmosphere. During one of the grievance meeting, he even took the initiative to speak about some of the injustices he had experienced and seen. He talked about how a local landlord had taken a liking to a woman and forced her husband to kill him. In the end, he forced the woman to jump into a river and killed the landlord's family in a fit of rage. Many people in the meeting shed tears and praised Ba Daojiang's righteous actions. Then, they said with righteous indignation that they wanted to eradicate the evil nobles in the world. Under such an atmosphere, Ba Daojiang also fell in love with this place, and began to pay attention to the lives of the Lung Feng and the other temporary soldiers. He realized that these people were very obedient and treated others kindly. More importantly, they were all quite strong, and most of them were literate and sensible. All these discoveries left Ba Daojiang astonished. It was not that he had never seen or interacted with the Ming army, but it was his first time seeing an army like this. Especially once, when he saw a Lung Feng pour hot water for a temporary soldier to soak his feet, saying that it could get rid of the fatigue of the day, he was truly shocked. Was there really such a kind army in the world? If there was, then wasn't this his goal, his heaven on earth? The more he learned, the more shocked he became. Not only Ba Daojiang, but more and more people also found out that the Lung Feng before them were not Ming soldiers, but mercenaries hired by the southern Ming emperor. They were superior to some of the Ming dynasty's troops. Their combat power was astonishing and their military discipline was strict. They trained hard and their military quality was strong. They ate well and received good treatment. At the same time, they also owned the world's most powerful firearms and so on. All of this shocked Ba Daojiang. At the same time, he also started to feel envious. When he finally couldn't help but ask a temporary soldier if he could become a real temporary soldier, or even a Lung Feng that everyone envied, he received an affirmative answer. As long as you are willing to work and obey orders, anyone can have a good future here. It was these words that made Ba Daojiang completely put down the burden in his heart. He made a decision in his heart that he must perform well and strive to be able to make contributions in the next battle. At this time, other than training with the Lung Feng and the temporary soldiers, he also took the initiative to learn how to read. He heard that if he wanted to become a Lung Feng, he had to learn how to read because a very mysterious sixth young master said that an uneducated army would not have a future. Although he didn't know what this so-called future was, since everyone was doing this, he would follow and learn. Perhaps there really would be a future that belonged to him. 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers had been transferred to Yang Qindong's side. Thus, the original 1,200 soldiers had been strengthened to 3,200 soldiers. Once the training was completed, the 2,000 soldiers should be able to unleash a considerable amount of combat power. Guanyin and Ma Wei let out a sigh of relief when they only picked 2,000 captives and the ratio of 1 to 15. They were afraid that the imperial envoy would take all 30,000 captives. In that case, they would have military strength, but whether or not they would be able to form a fighting force was another matter. Also, food and drink for 30,000 people was a big problem. Fortunately, Yang Qindong only took 2,000 people, so it didn't give them too much pressure. On the 5th day after the victory, the Guangdong political commissioner Liu Youfu finally arrived at the foot of Guangzhou Prefecture. The 28,000 captives were handed over to him. As for how they would be treated, whether they would be locked in prison or sent to the city as forced labor, that was the matter of the local officials. After shaking off the burden of the captives, Guanyin and Ma Wei came together to find Yang Qindong to discuss whether or not they could stop chasing after the desperate enemy. Yang Qindong had long expected Guanyin and Ma Wei's arrival. The three of them met in the military tent. Other than Beta Persei, who was following behind them, there was no one else in the tent. Yang Qindong finally opened his mouth. "Generals? But I don't know what you mean by chasing after the bandits?" Yang Qindong asked with a puzzled face. When he was asked about the proper matter, Ma Wei's expression became excited. He rubbed his fists and said, "Sir, the Huang bandits outside Guangzhou Prefecture have been defeated and have retreated to Zhaoqing Prefecture. I heard that they are collecting the remnants of their soldiers, but in the end, it is difficult for the hearts of the people to follow after their defeat. This is the time for us to follow up our victory and chase after them. If we can quickly reach the foot of the city, like when we went from Ganzhou to Guangzhou Prefecture, I think we will be able to intimidate the enemy. Winning the battle will be a certainty. At that time, after the Huang bandits have suffered heavy losses, they will truly be unable to continue and will have to leave. Then we can return Guangdong to a time of peace. For this matter, General Guan and I have already made preparations. All the food on the road has been prepared and is enough for the army." Just as Ma Wei finished speaking, Guan Ying, who was standing to the side, took the initiative to say, "Yes, I have prepared enough meat pies for the army to reach Wuzhou Prefecture. There is still some left. You can rest assured on this point." At this moment, Guan Ying's mentality had long relaxed. Originally, Guangya minister had arranged for him to follow beside Yang Chendong because he needed him to study at the side. In the future, he could become a general and become the cornerstone of the Southern Ming Ministry of War. Even Guan Ying himself thought this way. However, on the road from Ganzhou to Guangzhou Prefecture, Guan Ying's mentality had more or less changed. After he saw the strength of the mercenaries, the competitive heart in his heart had weakened greatly. Especially after he learned that Yang Chendong had used 800 men to break through the Huang bandits' 80,000-strong army. He became even more aware of the difference between the two sides. Yang Chendong used troops like a god. In this aspect, he was ashamed of his inferiority. However, what he admired more was the strength of the mercenaries themselves. With such strong troops, as long as the commander was not an idiot, it would probably be difficult for them to lose a battle. Since this was the case, he might as well not interfere with military matters. Instead, he would focus on logistics and study at the side. When the Guangdong matter was over, he could report it to Guangya minister and similarly choose people from the army to train a group of elite troops. In the future, he would be a general and be able to use them. Guan Ying was completely convinced, as was Ma Wei. The two of them had the same thoughts and both found Yang Chendong to ask him to send troops. The two southern Ming generals had the same view. Yang Chendong's eyes narrowed into slits. The actions of these two people were like the old saying, "Sweep the snow in front of your own door." Just as Ma Wei had said, if the Huang bandits were heavily injured, they might leave Guangdong. Thus, this place was safe. However, what about other places? What about Guangxi, which was close to Guangdong? Moreover, once they left Guangxi, what would happen to Yunnan? If they gathered together with Zhu Huiyun and the others, wouldn't that be a new problem? Yang Chendong could think of these things, but he did not believe that Ma Wei and Guan Ying could not, especially the latter. As the minister-counselor of the Ministry of War, he was highly valued by Guangya. How could he not predict such a situation? However, they still wanted to send troops to Wuzhou House. One had to say that they knew what to do. Thinking back to when Guangdong was in chaos, Guangxi did not send troops to help. On the contrary, they placed troops in the cities near each other to prevent the Huang bandits from entering other places. Such a method naturally allowed Guangxi to be temporarily safe. However, this would only increase the pressure on Guangdong. The Huang bandits could not go to other places, so they could only cause trouble in Guangdong. Such a method was really hurtful. This was why Ma Wei wanted to chase the Huang bandits out of Guangdong. As for where they went, he did not say and did not think about it. Even Guan Ying pretended that he didn't know anything. If one chopstick was easily broken, 10 chopsticks would not be broken. This was the power of unity. The relationship between Guangdong and Guangxi was enough to show that Nanming and Baiming were not on good terms. The various houses under Nanming were not on good terms. If this continued, the internal losses would be too great. How could the people not be in chaos? How could the people live a good life? How could they not die? Yang Chendong thought of his own Yangxia. In the beginning, all sides were united. What if this went on for a long time? If the territory became bigger and the population increased, what would the result be? Would there be people who would raise their own troops and respect themselves? Would there be people who also had the same idea of sweeping the snow in front of their own door? There must be. Since Ji Ranqing had predicted the emergence of these problems, how to solve them. It must be known that the current transportation system was too underdeveloped. Once something happened, it would be a long time before anyone knew about it. This was not conducive to the management of a large area of land. As such, he needed to think carefully about how to do it best. In short, the mistakes that happened to others could not happen to himself. Otherwise, even if he became stronger, he would not be able to maintain this situation for long. Yang Qindong was deep in thought for a long time without speaking. Ma Wei and Guanning were very anxious. After the two of them looked at each other, they whispered, "Sir, when do you think we should send troops?" Chapter 378. Do you really only want to chase the yellow bandits out of Guangdong? If one day other places do the same, won't they come back to Guangdong? When that time comes, what should we do? Yang Qindong suddenly raised his head. His gaze was as sharp as a sword as he looked at Ma Wei and asked. Ma Wei panicked when he was asked this question. Just as he did not know how to answer, Yang Qindong's gaze turned and landed on Guanning. General Ma is the commander of the Guangdong Guards. It is understandable that you only have Guangdong in your eyes, but General Guan is the vice director of the Southern Ming Ministry of War. You should have the bigger picture in your eyes. Are you also so short-sighted? Guan Ying's expression froze. He quickly lowered his head and said with an embarrassed expression, "Sir, I was wrong. I was wrong as well." Ma Wei saw that Guanning from the Ministry of War was reprimanded. How could he continue to be stubborn? He quickly lowered his head as if admitting his mistake. Seeing that the two had admitted their mistakes, Yang Qindong's expression relaxed. "Forget it. I was entrusted by the emperor and had to consider the long term. If we only chase the yellow bandits out of Guangdong, it does not count as completing the mission. That is why I said what I said just now. If it was too serious, I ask for your understanding." Yang Qindong's words slowed down and there was a hint of self-blame. Immediately, Ma Wei and Guan Ying's expressions became uneasy. "Sir, what are you saying? You have great insight and thought things through. We can learn from you." And everyone liked to hear flattery. Yang Qindong's expression also became much better. "Good, since the two generals have the same opinion, then let's see how we can get rid of the yellow bandits once and for all." As he spoke, Yang Qindong walked in front of the sand table in the tent. The sand table was a military sand table. It had already appeared in the Ming dynasty, but its name was Kanyu Map. It was said that the martial great master Zhu Houzhou loved to play with sand tables. The sand table had already marked out the areas where the yellow bandits were active. Yellow flags were placed on top. The surrounding southern Ming troops had black flags in their hands. Come and take a look." After the defeat at the prefecture of Guangzhou, Huang Yuliang retreated to the Zhaoqing prefecture with his remaining troops and is resting there. To the north of Wuzhou, there was a ridge known as Mengzhu Ridge. Once one left from here, one could enter Guizhou and Huguang. In order to prevent the chaos of the yellow bandits from spreading everywhere, this imperial envoy has already arranged for Pingle Prefecture's General Hishang and 2 battalions of the mercenary army to defend that place, making it impossible for them to leave. Then, to the south of Xuanzhou Prefecture, Gaozhou is extremely close to Laizhou. If things go south, the yellow bandits can also pass through here to reach Shanghai. In order to prevent this imperial envoy has also arranged for Ganzhou Prefecture's General Yu Ping and 2 battalions of the mercenary army to defend that place, cutting off their path of retreat. When Yang Qindong said this, Guanning and Ma Wei had a look of sudden realization. Previously, Hao Shang and General Yu Guang had suddenly disappeared without a trace. They had guessed that they had received the imperial envoy's military orders, but no one had been able to guess what they had done. Looking at it now, they knew that Yang Qindong had long made plans and arrangements. Thus, the defeat of the yellow bandits in front of the Canton prefecture should have been within his expectations. Thinking about how he had even calculated the future situation and made preparations, at the same time the two of them sighed in admiration. They acknowledged the title of the God of War even more. Yang Qindong did not look at their expressions. It was as if he did not care about their thoughts. Instead, he continued, "Thus, if the yellow bandits want to establish themselves, other than fighting us head-on, they can only choose to retreat to Guangxi. General Guan, you are an official of the Ministry of War. Please immediately inform the Guangxi Guards to guard the front line between Nanning Prefecture and Liuzhou Prefecture. No matter what, they cannot give the yellow bandits an opportunity. Of course, if they do not have the ability to guard it, then being affected by the bandits will have nothing to do with us. I will give them 7 days to prepare. After 7 days, the troops will march to Wuzhou Prefecture and completely take care of the Huang bandits. Palm landed on the sand table. Yang Chendong spoke with a determined expression. It was clear that he had already made up his mind. Yes. Guaning and Ma Wei both sighed in admiration as they spoke. At this moment, they finally understood that this imperial envoy was not doing nothing. On the contrary, he had thought of everything. He was particular about planning before acting. In terms of ability, he was much stronger than them. Guaning sent people to send a message to the Guangxi army. Ma Wei also began to gather more food for the army. After seeing the power of the mercenaries, they did not dare to be the slightest bit negligent in terms of food. The Yang family army was able to have better food. Every day they ate until they were full and rested well. The morale of the army was greatly boosted. Even the 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers blended into this positive atmosphere. Some people were already planning in their hearts that if there was a big battle, they would perform well and strive to remove the word temporary from their heads. Zhaoqing Manor. The original Yamen became Huang Yuliang's place to rest and work. Because of the defeat of the Guang province soldiers, although there were still many yellow bandits in Zhaoqing Manor, the entire atmosphere had become much lower. The morale of the soldiers was low. As the main commander, Huang Yuliang, of course, was anxious. He called for Zhu Fangyong, who had saved his life outside the Guang province city. Outside the Guang province city, if Zhu Fangyong had not acted decisively, Huang Yuliang would not have been able to escape. Thinking about how General Geng Jun had been so brave and good at fighting but had still died in front of the battlefield, he felt waves of fear. It was because Zhu Fangyong had saved his life that he relied heavily on this person. Since Huang Yuliang liked Zhu Fangyong so much, it was hard for the people below to not be jealous. Someone asked why things were so coincidental. They had just wanted to use the arrival of the reinforcements to lure Ma Wei out of the city when the reinforcements actually arrived. Was there some connection? Some people even doubted Zhu Fangyong's loyalty. After all, this person had only joined the Yellow Bandits for a short time. In the face of these rumors, Zhu Fangyong actually admitted to it. He said that all of this was the blessings of the heavens. It was all thanks to this plan. Otherwise, if they were caught off guard, would the Southern Ming Empire's reinforcements not come? If that really happened, the losses would be even greater. However, the scouts were so useless that they did not even give a warning when the Southern Ming Empire's reinforcements arrived. They had truly missed the opportunity. When Zhu Fangyong's words reached Huang Yuliang's ears, not only did he not doubt this person, but he also thought that this was a blessing from the heavens. While praising him and making him his trusted aide, he also killed the scout to improve the morale of the troops. After Zhu Fangyong became Huang Yuliang's trusted aide, he naturally became an important guest. He was often called over to eat together and at the same time, analyzed the current situation. General Zhu, we have already been in Zhaoqing Manor for a period of time. We have also gathered many scattered soldiers, but I don't know why the Southern Ming Empire's army did not take this opportunity to attack us. What are they planning to do? Huang Yuliang's face was filled with worry. The Southern Ming Empire's reinforcements were truly too powerful. They were so powerful that he felt a bone-deep fear. Young master, there is no need to worry. There must be a reason why the Southern Ming Empire's reinforcements did not come. From this general's point of view, it should be because their own military strength is insufficient. This general has sent people to inquire about some news. I heard that the Southern Ming Empire's reinforcements have actually recruited some of our brothers as soldiers. Haha, it seems that they are really desperate. Zhu Fangyong said with a smile, but he was truly worried. He thought about the information he had received from the Security Bureau 2 days ago. It said that the 6th young master wanted him to keep Huang Yuliang in Zhaoqing no matter what and wait for him to bring his troops over to carry out his previous plan. He also said that the Yang family's army was too small. If they wanted to achieve anything, they had to expand their army and accept many yellow bandits as soldiers. He was truly shocked. As for keeping Huang Yuliang in Zhaoqing City, Zhu Fengyong felt that it was not difficult to do. This was because this young Master Huang did not want to admit defeat and wanted to rise again. How could he leave so easily? It was not easy to get to Zhaoqing City. However, as for the matter of recruiting yellow bandits as soldiers, he was truly worried. Zhu Fengyong, who had stayed in the yellow bandits' army for a period of time, knew that they were just a bunch of villagers who had no choice but to join the army to fill their stomachs. They did not have any culture and did not understand any great principles. They would only follow whoever gave them food. Would these people be loyal? Would these people be of any use on the battlefield? He did not want to drag down other allies. Although he was worried, this was something the sixth young master would do. Due to his respect and reliance on the sixth young master, he did not say anything in the end. He was currently in Zhaoqing City and could not care about things that were too far away. It was better to complete the mission first. Huang Yuliang was originally raising a cup of strong wine to his mouth when he heard Zhu Fengyong's words. When he heard that his subordinates had been recruited by the Southern Ming, he was first stunned and then laughed. His originally nervous expression instantly relaxed. Ha ha ha, the Southern Ming actually recruited our soldiers. Is this true? I sent out 3 groups of people and the news they sent back was the same. It should not be false. Zhu Fengyong replied with a serious expression. Good, haha, good. Huang Yuliang stood up with a face full of joy. The Southern Ming actually used our soldiers as soldiers. This shows that they have too few soldiers. More importantly, they do not know that the people who can join my volunteer army are all warriors who have lost faith in the Southern Ming. If they lose on the battlefield, in order to survive, they will have to surrender to save their lives. However, their hearts will still be on our side. If we use these people, once the two sides fight and we have the upper hand, they will very likely turn their spearhead on the battlefield. That will be the time they reap what they sow, ha ha ha. Chapter 379. The laughing Huang Yuliang finally relaxed. Even the captives had to be reorganized. It seemed that the Southern Ming army was really weak, facing such an opponent, so what if they lost once? Compared to Huang Yuliang's mocking laughter, Zhu Qizhen was laughing to his heart's content in the Southern Ming capital, Nanjing. At the same time, in the political affairs hall, Zhu Qizhen looked at the 6 ministers and several other important officials with a smile on his face. Come, everyone, take a look. This is the report of victory that we just received. The Guangzhou government was victorious. More than 10,000 enemy leaders were killed and nearly 30,000 people were captured. We have greatly damaged the arrogance of the yellow bandits. The report of the battle had just been received. At this moment, Zhu Qizhen's mood was very good. In the past few days, his expression, which had been troubled by the situation in Yunnan, was much more relaxed. The report of victory was quickly read by several important officials. The officials immediately knelt on the ground and said loudly, "Your Majesty is blessed by the heavens. Congratulations. Long live your Majesty." That's right. The heavens have indeed treated me well. Beloved official Lu, immediately prepare to worship the heavens. I want to announce it to the world. Since ancient times, the imperial family liked to seek good luck. How could Zhu Qizhen let go of the opportunity to show off his wise and powerful status? Yes, your Majesty. Lu De stood in position and complied. However, he did not immediately go to work after answering. First, he had a thoughtful expression. Then, he raised his head and slowly said, "Your Majesty, this official does not understand military affairs. However, from reading, I know the principle of pursuing the enemy. Why is it that the Guangzhou government has clearly defeated the yellow bandits, but did not pursue the enemy?" Following Lu De's words, Zhu Qizhen, who was sitting on the dragon throne, had a serious expression on his face. This scene was clearly seen by the Minister of War, Kuang Yi. Immediately, he held his ceremonial tablet and walked out. Minister Lu, Minister Counselor Yening has already reported back. He said that the Ming army and the mercenaries were already very tired. In addition, we did not have enough troops, so we did not pursue. On this point, this official agrees with this action. So it is like this. This official has worried too much. Seeing that Zhu Qizhen's expression had turned ugly, Lu De knew that he had achieved his goal. He knew when to stop and stood back. Your Majesty, Duke of Loyalty and Courage's command this time was successful. Guanyin and the others cooperated well. This subject thinks that we should reward them and encourage them so that they can go all out and be driven by us. Kuang Yi had no intention of chasing after Lu De. The person who came was Wang Zue. He was also one of the 9 important officials that Yang Chendong saved during the Battle of Tumu. At this time, when he saw Kuang Ye's lifeless eyes, he had already guessed what the other party was thinking. He shook his head and persuaded, Minister Feng, you don't need to think too much. We have been officials for many years. How can we not know the Emperor's thoughts? Even that Duke of Loyalty and Courage should be very clear. Moreover, he shouldn't mind too much. You won't mind? Kuang Yi asked, not quite understanding. Why would he mind? For him, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is already an extremely high honor. He is only 21 years old. In history, there are very few people who can do this. As the saying goes, it's lonely at the top. Wang Zue's lips moved slightly, speaking slowly. Then he cupped his fists and said, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is a smart person. This kind of person is very opinionated and will endure humiliation. Otherwise, he would not have such achievements. Besides, since this is the Emperor's intention, we as officials are powerless to change it. We only need to speak the truth. As for what kind of situation will occur, we can only wait and see. Wang Zue looked like he saw it very clearly. This was also because he was the Minister of Revenue. Originally, he dealt with money. Could be said that he always calculated the accounts very clearly. Because of fear, Ingzong found a reason not to reward Yang Chendong. This was originally the Emperor's power. But he did forget one thing. That was, this time he was facing Yang Chendong. Was he such a good person? It was said that in Baiming, because the Minister of Justice, Yu Shiyue, offended him, he was overthrown. Even Dai Zong could not protect him. How could such a person not fight back after being schemed against? Just wait and see. If this goes on, Zhu Qizhen is likely to suffer the consequences of his own actions. Because Wang Zue saw through everything, he knew that this was a battle between 2 tigers. Bystanders could not persuade, so he did not say anything. At this time, he told Kuang Yi all of this. This oldest minister of war quickly understood. He sighed and said, "Ai, this old man is old. I'm afraid I won't be able to serve the Emperor for long. Yes, since you don't have enough energy, it's better to take a good rest." Wang Zue chuckled. His hint was effective. Since he could not solve any problem by speaking, it was better to not say anything and just watch. The so-called old meant that his energy was limited. It meant that Kuang Yi would not say anything more on this matter. The 2 important officials spoke and then left the political affairs hall after everyone else. They were thinking about what kind of expression the front line would have after receiving the imperial edict. A few days later, it was the last day for the Ming army to rest. According to the plan, the army would leave the Guang province house the next morning and head toward Zhaoqing house, which was heavily guarded by the yellow bandits. Food and equipment were all prepared. With the cooperation of Administrator Lu Yufu, Commander Ma Wei, and Guanyin, all of the work was done. When the time came, the army would set off. Compared to the last time, the number of troops was much higher. For the Ming army, Ma Wei and Guanyin led 4,000 soldiers. For the mercenaries, there were 4 companies of Lengfeng, 8 companies of support soldiers, 8 companies of support soldiers, and 2,000 temporary support soldiers. In total, there were 3,200 people. On the surface, it did not seem like a lot. It was about the size of a normal garrison. However, in reality, the morale of this army was very high. Especially their combat strength, even if there were several times more troops, they would not be a match for them. On this point, Ma Wei and Guanyin were very confident. They were looking forward to doing something new. It was also at this time that the eunuch who announced Emperor Ingzong's edict came. The moment he appeared, he asked all of the generals above the rank of Chiliarch to enter the tent. Ma Wei, Guanning, and the others naturally rushed over. However, when the news reached Yang Chundong in another tent, he was playing 5-in-a-row chess with his wife, Hu Yan, and they looked like they were in the midst of a battle. The tent door opened from the outside and Tiger's Mane walked in. "Young master, the eunuch that Emperor Ingzong sent has arrived. He is now meeting with the Ming army general." "Oh, he is not slow," Yang Chundong answered absent-mindedly. Then he looked up at Hu Yan and said, "Yener, it is your turn to go. Watch carefully or else I will win." Lu Lang, seeing that Yang Chundong was not moved and had no intention of meeting with the eunuch, Hu Yan said worriedly. When he saw Hu Yan's worried expression, Yang Chundong said with a relaxed face, it's okay. Husband has his own plans. If I am not wrong, it should have nothing to do with me. Since that is the case, why should I join in the fun? We will be on the road tomorrow. It is better to take advantage of the time to relax. Come, let's continue." Oh, since her husband said that nothing would happen, Hu Yan completely believed that nothing would happen. She immediately agreed and began to think about how to write the next sentence. Tiger's Mane only came to deliver the news. Since the young master knew, his task was completed. He then left the tent and it seemed to be quiet again. Chapter 380. In contrast, the large tent not far away was particularly lively. When the eunuch announced the emperor's decree, if everyone was not rewarded with silver taels, they were rewarded with military exploits, and they were promoted. Which one of them was not in high spirits? Even Ma Wei, because of his meritorious service, had offset the crime of losing his territory. "General Ma, Dr. Guan, why don't I see the imperial envoy?" The eunuch who was in charge of announcing the edict spoke with a hint of dissatisfaction when he did not see Yang Chundong appear after he had finished what he was supposed to say. The position of eunuchs in the Ming dynasty was not low. In history, many eunuchs with power came from this dynasty. To be able to become an edict-announcing eunuch, which one of them did not have the trust of the emperor. Outside officials did not dare to offend such a person. As for his question, the two of them had to answer. After they looked at each other with great tacit understanding, Guanning took the initiative to stand out and say, replying to eunuch, "The Duke of Loyalty is not in the camp. He must have gone out to patrol. You also know that as the commander of the army, it is normal to have more worries." "Oh, that is a pity. I wanted to admire the Duke of Loyalty's elegance. Since this is not a coincidence, we will meet again if we have the chance." The edict-announcing eunuch's face was filled with disappointment. He did not know that his words, in the eyes of Ma Wei and Guanning, were no different from missing out on life and death. Thinking back to the time when Yang Chundong killed Jia Ping and punished Han Qing, how swift was that? It also showed that this person was not to be trifled with. This time he rewarded everyone, but did not mention Yang Chundong. With his temper, who knew what he would do? At this time, this eunuch was still thinking of going to see the imperial envoy. If he did not do well, he might be kicked out in a fit of anger. If that was not a brush with death, what was it? After the edict-announcing eunuch received some benefits and silver from Ma Wei, Guanning, and the others, he left with a smile on his face. The two generals were left with bitter expressions on their faces. In the battle outside of Guangzhou Prefecture City, the two of them should be very clear about who should have the greatest merit. However, this time, the emperor had given out rewards other than the greatest merit. In this way, wouldn't they feel ashamed to accept it? Of course, the most important thing was that they were leaving for Wuxia tomorrow. At this moment, would the imperial envoy be angry? Would the plan change? The two of them really wanted to go to Yang Chundong's tent to find out what was going on. But they were also worried that if they really went there, they would run into bad luck. In the end, they came up with a solution, which was to use the excuse that the rich gentry in the Guangzhou government wanted to hold a farewell party for the army to test Yang Chundong's agreement. With the decision made, the two of them entered the city and found the Guangdong provincial commissioner, Lu Youfu, and briefly explained the situation. "Lord Lu, I'll have to trouble you with this matter. After all, you are the Guangdong provincial commissioner. This time, the emperor only rewarded military generals and not civil officials. It looks like it has nothing to do with you. Presumably, if you go now, even if the imperial envoy is a bit angry, he won't come for you. Ma Wei said with a forced smile. Yes, from what I see, Lord Lu is indeed the most suitable person. After all, the rich gentry wants to hold a farewell party for the army. This is the matter of the local officials. Guanyin added on. At this moment, Lu Youfu knew that he had been sold. However, when he thought about how this battle was for the peace of Guangdong, only after it was done well could his position as the provincial commissioner be considered legitimate. Even if it was for himself, he had to do something. All right, I'll go take a look. However, remember, you owe me a good meal of wine. Of course, this was a joke. With Lu Youfu saying this, Ma Wei and Guanyin nodded their heads in agreement. Then they watched Lord Lu enter the imperial envoy's tent. He went in quickly and came back even faster. When Lu Youfu came out, he shook his head as he walked. This scene fell into the eyes of Ma Wei and Guanyin and could be said to be endlessly worried. When he came closer, the two of them went up and asked, "How is Lord Lu? Did the imperial envoy change the plan?" The plan hasn't changed. The imperial envoy said that everything is as usual. Lu Youfu shook his head and said the result. Hearing that there were no changes, Ma Wei and Guanying's faces relaxed. However, they then asked in confusion, "Lu Dio, if everything is as usual, why did you act like that just now? What is the meaning of this?" It's just that when I saw the imperial envoy's expression was as usual and his reply was also quick, I thought that the reward this time was indeed a bit unfair. Lu Youfu said with a sigh. When he saw Yang Qindong just now, the other party was still the same as before, as if the eunuch who announced the decree had never appeared. This kind of calmness, this kind of ease, and even this kind of broad-mindedness could not help but be admired. At least, if it were him, he probably would not have such a calm expression. Only then did Lu Youfu express his feelings. However, when these words were spoken, the three of them did not speak anymore. After all, the eunuch who announced the decree was under the emperor's orders. As officials, they did not have the courage to talk about the emperor in private. Fortunately, the plan was as usual, so they could go back and have a good night's sleep. In the military tent not far away, Yang Qindong was thinking about something with his eyes closed. Hu Yen had already left to prepare dinner, leaving only Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei here. "Young master, are you not angry?" Seeing that there were no outsiders, Tiger's Mane finally could not help but ask. "That's right. I also want to ask this." To the side, Beta Persei lowered his voice. This was not because he was talking about a secret, but because his voice was like thunder. When he spoke normally, it would sometimes scare Yang Qindong, which was why he was forbidden to lower his pitch when he spoke in the future. The two taciturn people beside them, who usually did not ask themselves and rarely spoke, had actually spoken on this matter. Yang Qindong's originally closed eyes slowly opened. He then looked at the two of them with interest and said, "What? You're fighting for justice on behalf of the young master?" "Young master, it's not fighting for justice. It's the truth. Why are those people who did not do anything great rewarded, but you don't have anything?" Seeing that Yang Qindong was not angry, Tiger's Mane became much bolder when he spoke. "Ha ha ha, well said. It's the truth." Yang Qindong nodded, seeming to agree with Tiger's Mane's statement, but then shook his head. But what does the truth matter? When others must turn a blind eye to it, the truth can also be treated as if it doesn't exist. At the end of the day, everything depends on strength. After Yang Qindong said this, he looked at Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei and said in a teaching tone, "Remember, benefits are not something that you want, but should be fought for with practical actions. Only when you become strong, no one will dare to give you a hard time, and all kinds of unfairness will leave you. On the contrary, before that, even if you have any dissatisfaction, you need to endure it. Otherwise, even if you have great talent, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to show it. Understand?" These words were somewhat profound, but the two of them had been with Yang Qindong for more than a day or two. Even if they didn't understand the whole thing, they understood the gist of it. Young master's words were nothing more than that. They were not strong enough now, and they still needed to work hard to develop. Only when they developed and became stronger, such unfair things would not happen again. Yes, young master, we understand. We will work harder in the future. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei both said with a solemn expression. Very good. Seeing that the other party understood what he meant, Yang Chendong first smiled, then closed his mouth again. He was thinking about the problem of how Yangtze's population could grow rapidly. In the end, the development of Yangtze was still too short, and the foundation was too weak. For example, the problem of population alone was enough to stop all of his development paths. Just this morning, they received news from Resin City that the fleet sent out to search for rubber trees had returned, bringing back over 100 ships of rubber trees that could be transplanted. This great news was enough to prove that electricity could finally be put to use in Resin City. But even so, Yang Chendong couldn't help but feel a little melancholy while feeling gratified. Now that he had the territory, if he didn't have enough population and army to support it, then it would still be a big problem. Before the real expansion began, how to get more people to Chichen City without outsiders knowing was the most important problem. Population. Thinking about this, Yang Chendong's mind quickly formed plans. The next morning, more than 7,000 allied troops set off from Guangzhou. Their target was Zhaoqing. As the Guangdong political envoy, Liu Youfu did not follow them. Instead, he sent the army off at the city gates. He was looking forward to this army thoroughly defeating or even eliminating the Huang bandit army, allowing him to become the true Guangdong political envoy. The moment the army moved out, the scouts sent by the Huang bandits spread the news and headed straight for Zhaoqing Prefecture, which was several hundred li away. Huang Yuliang, who was in Zhaoqing, had already listened to Zhu Fangyong's suggestion and retreated to Wuzhou. At this moment, there were about 40,000 troops gathered in Wuzhou. Most of them were defeated soldiers outside of Guangzhou. After these days, the people who had fled from the defeat had all returned to Wuzhou. They wanted to make a comeback. Or it could be said that they didn't have much of a choice. The surrounding cities were all destroyed when they rebelled. With no one to plant the fertile land, how could they reap any harvest in autumn? Without food, surviving would be a problem. At least when they came to the Wuzhou prefecture, they would have food to eat. Although it was not a war and they only had 2 meals of porridge a day, as long as they did not starve to death and fainted, there was still hope, right? Chapter 381. For the sake of food and survival, there would be many people entering the Wuzhou prefecture every day under the banner of the Revolutionary Army. The bandit leader, Huang Yuliang, was overjoyed when he saw all of this. Regardless of the reason, these people were willing to seek refuge with him. At least he had made a name for himself. With a name, there would be people. With people, he could go around killing and pillaging. Food and money would flow into his hands endlessly. With this cycle, his territory would grow bigger and bigger, and his military strength would also grow. One day, it would not be impossible for him to ascend the throne and become an emperor. In order to achieve these goals, the first thing he had to do was to deal with the invaders. The news had already been sent over. When he learned that the Southern Ming Empire had sent over 7,000 soldiers to Zhaoqing Prefecture, Huang Yuliang laughed heartily. Only 7,000 people, and they dare to go against my army of 40,000? Do they really not want to live anymore? Huang Yuliang's laughter traveled to the various leaders in the tent. Naturally, everyone laughed along with him. In their eyes, these people were also not optimistic about the 7,000 Southern Ming Empire troops. At this moment, they seemed to have forgotten about their defeat outside the prefecture of Guangzhou. Of course, there were too many reasons why they had failed. For example, the other party had ambushed them and caught them off guard. However, now that they were prepared, they didn't believe that these 7,000 people would be able to turn into monsters. Young Master, the Southern Ming Empire only sent over 7,000 people. I think they might not even be able to reach the Wuzhou prefecture. Zhaoqing Prefecture's General Cheng should be able to defeat them. One of the leaders saw that Huang Yuliang was in a good mood and hurriedly flattered him. The so-called General Chang was one of the leaders of the Huang bandit army, Chang Yuan. Chang Yuan had some military talent. However, because he was slightly less experienced than Gung Jun and the other three, he did not enter the ranks of the four heavenly kings. However, following Gung Jun's death, there were now calls for him to be a substitute and become one of the four heavenly kings. With such ability and charisma, Huang Yuliang sent 5,000 of his men to Zhaoqing Prefecture to test him. They were there to stop the Southern Ming Empire's army. The art of war said that once, twice, thrice, and thrice one would be exhausted. What was important was that if they couldn't work together in battle, the morale of the army would drop and the morale would be shaken. Naturally, their combat strength would be greatly reduced. Chang Yuan and 5,000 troops were left behind in Zhaoqing Manor to achieve this goal. Of course, it would be best if he could win. It would be hard for Huang Bandit General to find any opponents in Guangdong. On the other hand, even if they lost, they would heavily injure their opponent and make ample preparations for the upcoming battle in Wuzhou. Not bad. Hearing someone mention Chang Yuan, Huang Yuliang said excitedly, "This young master has already promised Chang Yuan that as long as he can deal a heavy blow to the Southern Ming army, he will be allowed to enter the ranks of the four heavenly kings. I believe that he will not disappoint. Congratulations, young master. Congratulations on obtaining another good general." Everyone knew that since Huang Yuliang could say such words, the matter was basically settled. One by one, they began to praise him. As for how much of the praise was sincere and how much was sincere, it was up to the benevolent to see benevolence. Zhaoqing Manor. As a place that one had to pass through on their way to Wuzhou Manor, there were many Huang bandit soldiers standing on the city gate. Under the crowd was a man holding a long blade. He had a fierce expression and his eyes flashed with a bloodthirsty light. It was Chang Yuan himself. The news that he was going to replace the dead Gung Jun as one of the four heavenly kings had long reached his ears. Recently, there were even more people around him who were fawning over him. At the beginning, he was still clear-headed. At least he knew his own worth. However, as more and more people began to praise him, he became complacent. Sometimes, even he couldn't help but believe the words of others. It was as though he was really a god that had descended from the heavens, was really brave, was really a genius at leading troops, and was really victorious in every battle. This was what people often said. False things could become true if too many people said them. Chang Yuan, who started to become arrogant, became arrogant, frivolous, and underestimated the enemy. Even though he knew that the Southern Ming reinforcements who had defeated Huang Yuliang's 80,000-strong army were coming, when he saw the Southern Ming army gradually appearing from below the city gate, he still gave the order to open the city gate and attack. "Men, bring this general's warhorse over. Let's see how I'll be defeated and take the enemy general's head amidst an army of 10,000. It seemed like he had watched too many dramas. At this moment, Chang Yuan was filled with a heroic spirit. As he shouted, he waved the blade in his hand. "General is mighty! General is mighty!" As the main general was full of vigor, the soldiers below also had their morale boosted. They all shouted loudly with a face full of excitement. Amidst the shouts, the city gate of Zhaoqing Manor opened. Chang Yuan, who was riding a war horse and holding a blade, only left behind 2,000 soldiers to defend the city. He brought 3,000 soldiers and horses out of the city gate. Their uniforms were messy, their weapons were all different, and they did not even have a formation. The 3,000 soldiers seemed to have come out in one go and followed behind Chang Yuan. They did not look like a disciplined army at all. "This is the Yellow Bandit Army?" Guaning Yen, who was standing in the opposite army, looked at the incoming people and asked curiously. When he turned around, he saw the neat ranks of the Ming army, their uniform. They were the 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Right now, they were also wearing the same Mandarin duck battle jacket as the Southern Ming army uniform. The only difference was that they had a wide red cloth tied around their arms to make the difference. This was something that couldn't be helped. An army couldn't bring too many empty uniforms with them. Even though every Lung Feng and auxiliary soldier had a set of uniforms, they couldn't possibly give them to these temporary auxiliary soldiers. Even if they wanted to, it would not be enough. It was better to let them wear the Ming Army's uniform first. After all, there were many such things in the Guangzhou Manor's military storage. Secondly, it was to differentiate them. Everything could be changed the next time they replenished their supplies. Did they want to change out of the Ming Army's uniform at that time? Good. Then they needed to perform well. Of course, this was Yang Qindong's idea. With a large warehouse in his hands, he could take out more uniforms at any time. However, he would not do so. It was not worth it to attract suspicion for no reason. Speaking of which, this was the first time Guan Yingyan had truly fought with the Yellow Bandit army. The previous battle was in the dark. By the time he arrived at the battlefield, everything had already ended. Even though he saw some dead or captured Yellow Bandit soldiers, he did not have any direct impression of them. It was not like now where he could see everything in his mind at a glance. Guan Yingyan's doubtful words were heard by the 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers standing beside him. Their faces turned red and feverish. It seemed to be doubt, but in reality, the words of disdain made them feel ashamed. When they thought about how they had been proud to stay in this kind of army, they felt even more ashamed. Yang Qindong felt the change in the 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. He also knew that when Guan Yingyan said these words, it was not intentional. It was just his feelings. He had no intention of blaming anyone. Instead, he said to Luo Pe, the commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment beside him, "Commander Luo, in a moment, choose the 1st company as the main attack. Then, choose 2 companies of auxiliary soldiers and bring 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Do you have confidence in taking down Zhaoqing Manor? Please be at ease, Imperial Envoy. If we cannot take it down, we will bring our heads to you." Luo Pe, who had been instructed earlier, changed his title to Yang Qindong. Amidst a wave of impassioned words, he gave a standard military salute and turned to pick out the generals. "Imperial Envoy, do we not need to send troops? Isn't it a little too little to send only 2,000 people?" Ma Wei, who knew the mercenary army's military structure, rode forward and carefully probed. "Yes. Why don't we also send 2,000 people to help?" Guan Yingyan nodded. It was obvious that he agreed with Ma Wei's words. "There's no need." Yang Qindong shook his head resolutely and did not say anything else. He only looked at Zhaoqing Manor with a half-smile. No one knew what he was thinking. Luo Pe turned around and returned to the camp to pick out the generals. When they found out that they could only bring 1 company of Cold Front Regiment and 2 companies of auxiliary soldiers, a total of 4 company commanders of Cold Front Regiment and 8 company commanders of auxiliary soldiers instantly burst into an uproar. According to them, no matter how many companies were chosen to participate in the battle, they would definitely have a share. There were only 3 places, but the 12 company commanders all wanted to fight for it. Perhaps they also understood that there were not many opportunities to perform, or perhaps they were very confident in the soldiers they led. But no matter what, only a quarter of them could go to the battlefield. The majority of them did not have such an opportunity. If they did not fight for it, they would have even less of a chance. Obey orders. Seeing that the 12 company commanders had surrounded him, Luo Pe glared and a murderous aura exuded from his body, causing those company commanders who wanted to say something to immediately shut their mouths. Obeying orders and orders was the first lesson that every soldier had to learn after becoming an auxiliary soldier. It was also something that every soldier of the Yang family army had to do. Now that Luo Pe mentioned it, the reminder was very obvious. It was also a sign that he was about to get angry. Luo Pe only said 4 words and everyone quieted down. This made him very satisfied. He then turned his gaze to the auxiliary regiment commander Lu Zhua and said, "Regiment Commander Lu, you can decide which 2 companies of auxiliary soldiers to send." "Yes," Lu Zhua replied. Although they were both regimental commanders, Luo Pe was from the Cold Front Regiment while he was from the auxiliary regiment. One could imagine the difference between them. Even if he really went to the Cold Front Regiment, whether or not he could become a battalion commander would depend on luck. Chapter 382. The 2 regiment commanders worked together and quickly picked out 3 companies to fight. Together with the 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers, there were a total of 2,300 people ready to fight. Among the 3,300 people, the company at the forefront was the Cold Vanguard Company led by Battalion Commander Chinbo Luopa, had taken a step back this time, giving the opportunity to charge and break through the enemy lines to his battalion commander. Chun Bo's eyes shone brightly as he seized the opportunity with great difficulty. He felt as if there was an endless amount of energy in his body. When he thought about how the sixth young master was watching his performance on the battlefield behind him and his every move, he felt an inexplicable excitement all over his body. Peng Yu was in the Cold Vanguard Company. Due to his outstanding performance on the battlefield, he had been selected by the sixth young master as a member of the Cold Vanguard Company. This time, he had to perform outstandingly to repay the trust and support. Peng Yu was not the only one. The Cold Vanguard Company was also filled with energy. Since they were able to join the Cold Vanguard Company, they naturally had the right to know who the sixth young master was. Yang Qindong's appearance was like a shot of adrenaline to them, causing them to be extremely excited. The two auxiliary battalions were in the middle. Following behind the Cold Vanguard Company, they would be the main attackers when the battle started. After all, the weapons in their hands were crossbows that were slightly closer to the enemy. If they wanted to be effective, then they had to rush to the front of the enemy. Although there were only 200 of them, all of them were filled with confidence. It was not for any other reason, but because they believed in their comrades and the marksmanship of the Cold Vanguard Company members who would be assisting them on the battlefield. If anyone dared to counterattack or threaten their lives, the Cold Vanguard Company would definitely step in and take care of the enemy one by one. Standing at the very back were the 2,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Compared to a few days ago, they now looked like soldiers standing there. The military training made them look more upright and straight. The grievances meeting reminded them not to forget the past and to remember to strive for a better future. After eating and drinking well, each of them had a ruddy complexion. When they thought about becoming real auxiliary soldiers, they would have the opportunity to follow the auxiliary soldiers back to their headquarters and live a fair and just life without having to worry about food and drink. They became even more excited. It was as if the goal of their lives had already appeared. In order to live a happy life in the future, they had to perform well in this battle. With their fighting spirit and morale, they tightened their grip on the crossbows in their hands. Although the crossbows in their hands couldn't be compared to the auxiliary soldiers, regardless of whether it was shooting distance or accuracy, they were still much better than the rusty knives, hoes, and wooden sticks they used in the Huang bandit army. With such excellent weapons, they would definitely win this battle. The 2,300 soldiers all had their own ideas, but they were all thinking about how to fight this battle well and how to perform even more bravely. Behind them were the 900 Leng Feng and auxiliary soldiers. They stood motionless on the spot, like soldiers who had died many years ago in the Terracotta Army. There was no expression on their faces. They were waiting for an order to come out and take care of any opponents or enemies who wanted to threaten their safety. The 4,000 Ming soldiers stood on the right side of the formation. They craned their necks and waited to see the changes on the battlefield. Ma Wei and Guaning widened their eyes, as if they did not want to miss a single moment. They wanted to see how these mercenaries would perform. Behind these people were Yang Qindong's family. They sat in a few carriages. Tai Qingyi led a group of female soldiers to protect them. At the same time, there was a squad of Leng Feng who looked around vigilantly to prevent any suspicious people from approaching. In the carriages, the curtains of the 3 carriages were lifted. They were the first wife, Hu Yen, the third wife, Lady Shui, and Miss Su Menair. Even though Yang Qindong had said that there would be no mercy on the battlefield and that the scene would be a little terrifying, the 3 of them could not help but look at the battlefield out of curiosity. This was especially so for Su Menair. She knew very well what her mission was. She also knew what would happen to her once she completed her mission. Right now, she wanted to see if the person she was scheming against was worth it for her to complete her mission at the cost of her life. She wanted to see if it was worth it for her to be buried with him. Coincidentally, when Su Menair's gaze landed on Yang Qindong, the man, who had changed into a set of capable camouflage clothes, raised his right hand. Then he placed it down gently, looking extremely elegant. Following this action, the 2,300 soldiers surged forward in an orderly manner. When the 2,300 people stepped on the same spot and spread out in a straight line, they looked like a long dragon from afar. It gave off an awe-inspiring feeling. Any object would be very spectacular and beautiful when they were in an orderly manner. It was just like the wild geese in the sky. When they were about to return, regardless of whether they were in a straight line or in a straight line, they would give off a spectacular sight, let alone a formation formed by 2,300 soldiers. Hiss! General Ma Wei, who saw this scene, gasped. He did not expect that with just over 2,000 people, once they moved in unison, they would create such a shocking force. When he was leading the Guangdong Guards, he had also undergone training in this area. However, as the military discipline was not very strict, not to mention over 2,000 people, even a casual formation of 1,000 people or a formation of 100 people would not be able to be in an orderly manner. Their steps would also not be in the same spot like they were now. Naturally, their might would be much weaker. He could not help but look at Guaning, who was riding a horse at the side. He realized that the other party was also deep in thought. This official from the Ministry of War, who had just been promoted to a 5th-rank official, was also shocked by the scene in front of him. As someone in the Ministry of War, his vision was not like Ma Wei's, who only focused on one city in Guangdong. What he was thinking about was whether this uniform formation could be used in all of the Southern Ming Empire's armies. If it was possible, would their fighting strength increase? Even his own people were shocked, let alone the opponent, Chang Yuan. He rode on a horse and held a large blade in his hand. He looked very majestic, but when he saw the enemy move and the mountain-like aura pressing down on him, for some reason, his heart could not help but beat rapidly. A feeling of fear began to spread throughout his body. This feeling of fear quickly affected the warhorse under him. It was said that animals had a sense of fear towards danger. At this time, it also seemed to have sensed the endless danger. It began to snort and its body was also twisting, as if it wanted to escape and did not want to face this terrifying pressure. Not only Chang Yuan and his warhorse, even the 3,000 Huang bandits behind him were intimidated by this aura at this moment. Some of the more timid ones even began to walk unsteadily. From the looks of it, it was clear that they wanted to return to the city. It was as if with the city wall, they would be able to ensure their safety. Chang Yuan also wanted to return, but when he thought about how he was going to enter the 4 heavenly kings, if he did not do anything and was scared back into the city by the enemy's aura, once this matter spread out, how would he have the face to see others? He was afraid that from now on, no one would look up to him anymore. Whether it was for his own dignity or for his future glory, he had no reason to retreat. Furthermore, who said that if the formation was orderly, their fighting strength would be strong? Could it be that the embroidered pillow was useless? Perhaps with a single charge, he would be able to mess up the formation. After all, on the battlefield, one's methods were more powerful than one's formation. Steeling his resolve to fight, Chang Yuan raised the long saber in his hand high and shouted, "Everyone, listen to my orders. Follow me and kill our way over. If we win this battle, everyone will return to the city to drink, eat, and play. Women kill. Men die for wealth, birds die for food." A beautiful future was right in front of them. In addition, Chang Yuan took the lead and charged out. The 3,000 yellow bandits behind him also relied on their morale to shout and charge out. As Chang Yuan led his troops out, the distance between the two sides quickly closed. However, one side was like a tidal wave, while the other side was like a towering boulder. It was as if no one could shake it. Visually, it gave off such a feeling. At the very least, if they really clashed, the victor would depend on whether the tidal wave was stronger or the boulder was sturdier. Charge, charge! The yellow bandits' running speed was not slow, especially when Chang Yuan personally led his troops to charge at the front. The people behind him seemed to have eaten a bear's heart and leopard's guts, gaining more courage and strength. In the past, when they faced the Southern Ming army, they charged like this. In their view, as long as the main general was brave and the soldiers under him fought with their lives, with the advantage of numbers, this battle could still be fought and they could still win. The sounds of killing could already be heard clearly. The distance between the two sides was less than 500 meters. Facing the chaotic roars, Battalion Commander Chen Bo, who was walking at the front, had a firm expression. He was not affected by the changes in the other side and continued to take powerful steps forward. The front army did not move, so the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers at the back naturally did not change. Even though a grave expression appeared in the eyes of some people, the formation was still orderly and there was not the slightest hint of chaos. The distance between the two sides was only 300 meters. According to the Ming dynasty's ratio of 1 foot to the present day, it was only 300 meters. The shooting range of the U-5 rifle was 45 degrees. After flying for about 4,000 meters, it began to fall. Of course, this was not the effective range. Under the effective range, as long as one could see, 800 meters was not a problem. Within 600 meters, one could easily take a person's life. Now that the distance was less than 300 meters, it was time to attack. Some of the platoon leaders and squad leaders who understood the reasoning behind this looked at Battalion Commander Chen Bo. Chapter 383. How could Chen Bo not know that they could shoot now? However, this time he only had a company of cold vanguards. They could fight to their heart's content, but if they did that, what would happen to the auxiliary soldiers and the 2,000 auxiliary soldiers? Because their loyalty did not undergo the final test, they only had crossbows in their hands, which had a lethality of 150 meters. In other words, if Chen Bo gave the order to attack now, they would be able to heavily injure the enemy, but the auxiliary soldiers would have a hard time fighting. That was why Chen Bo did not give the order to attack immediately. He was calculating in his mind. A normal crossbow had a damage range of 120 meters and its effective range was around 100 meters. As long as he could control the range of the crossbow beyond 120 meters, he would still have the initiative. That way, more auxiliary soldiers would have a chance to perform. After some calculations, the distance between the two sides increased from 300 meters to 200 meters, then 180 meters, 170 meters. More cold vanguards started to look at the battalion commander Chen Bo, waiting for him to give the order to shoot. This was something that only the elite cold vanguards could do. Without orders from their superiors, even if the enemy was right in front of them, they could not simply shoot. Otherwise, they would be severely punished by military law. 150 meters was within the range of the auxiliary soldiers' crossbows. Chen Bo waved his right hand and the 100 cold vanguards stopped in their tracks. Release the safety and prepare to fire. Auxiliary soldiers, continue forward. Once the gunshot is heard, attack immediately. Don't give the enemy a chance to react. Finally, the order to attack was given. The 100 cold vanguards pulled the safety of their 95 shots in unison. The sound of the guns being fired was crisp and pleasing to the ear. While they were doing that, the 200 auxiliary soldiers and 2,000 auxiliary soldiers rushed out from their sides like carps crossing the river. They charged straight at the Huang bandit army. At a distance of 150 meters, the two sides were still closing in. The 500 archers in the Huang bandit army were ready to fire their arrows. General Cheng Yuan, who was leading the charge on his horse, was also ready to shout out the command to fire. 140 meters, 130 meters, crossbows ready, fire. A voice that was a step faster than Cheng Yuan's came from Chen Bo's ears. Following the order, hundreds of tongues of flame spewed out. Their targets were Cheng Yuan, who was on his horse, and the Huang bandits who were preparing to shoot. There were also 200 auxiliary soldiers working together with him. They had already aimed their crossbows at the archers. This was the group of people who posed the greatest threat to them. As long as they could take them all down, the control of the battlefield would definitely fall into their hands. At that time, they would be able to kill as they pleased. Ba ba ba, whoosh whoosh whoosh. The sound of gunfire and crossbow bolts pierced through the air almost at the same time, causing Cheng Yuan to fall off his horse, the archers to fall to the ground, and the Huang bandit army to descend into chaos. No one would have thought that the mighty General Cheng Yuan would fall off his horse without even touching the hair of his opponent. Their general was wearing armor and could not be injured by ordinary arrows, but why was he still so careless? Without a leader, the Huang bandit army appeared to be in chaos. Another junior leader wanted to take over the command of the army, but his influence was too small to make the entire army listen to his orders. Not to mention, as the second wave of gunfire and crossbow bolts rang out, the junior leader also fell to the ground with a plop. Kill. Chang Yuan is dead. Those who resist will be killed. Those who surrender will live. Seeing the enemy's generals fall to the ground one after another, the 200 and 2,000 auxiliary soldiers charged over with a momentum that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Along the way, they were like a hot knife through butter. Every time the sound of gunfire or crossbow bolts rang out, there would be people on the other side falling to the ground. This kind of situation where they had lost 7 to 8% of their forces without even fighting caused the morale of the Huang bandit army to plummet again and again. They were originally a motley crew. Their original goal of joining the Huang bandit army was not pure. They only wanted to eat their fill and did not even know what to do after eating. How could an untrained army with no goals, no ideals, no pursuits, no beliefs be a match for the Yang family army? Even if they were facing temporary auxiliary soldiers who had vague goals in life, they would not be a match for them. With the sound of crossbow bolts piercing through the air, they did not even need to engage in close combat. They could kill their opponents from far away. Then they would load the crossbow bolts and shoot. Every time this happened, the Huang bandit army would fall to the ground after being hit by the crossbow bolts. In this kind of near one-sided slaughter, under the situation where they had lost the support of their own archers, only death would await them if they continued to resist. At this moment, there were finally people who could not endure the fear because they did not know when they would fall. They also did not know if the next one to fall would be them. Since surrendering would allow them to live, there was no need to hesitate. Groups of people began to throw away the weapons in their hands and kneel on the ground. Good. Behind them, Yang Chundong used his binoculars to observe everything. Seeing that Chang Yuan had fallen from his horse and the Huang bandit army was in chaos, he waved his hand and said to Luo Pa, "You can attack the city now. Go." Yes. Luo Pa, who had been waiting impatiently for a long time, was waiting for these words. At this moment, other than leaving a company of cold vanguards to protect Yang Chindong's central army, the other 2 companies of cold vanguards rushed out like war horses. Some of them were even carrying things that Guaning and Ma Wei did not recognize and did not know what they were for. "Let's go, we can also advance. I believe that within 2 hours we will be able to eat in Zhaoqing's residence." Yang Chundong chuckled with a face full of confidence. Yes, the mercenaries are really powerful. Guaning and Ma Wei agreed, but no matter how one listened, they seemed to be perfunctory. After all, only Chang Yuan and the soldiers he brought out of the city were defeated. There were still 2,000 Huang bandit army defending the city. How could it be taken down so easily? One had to know that a siege would consume the most time and energy, as well as the source of soldiers. If things went wrong, a city would be surrounded for 10 days, half a month, or even longer. It would be normal for the city not to fall. No matter what Guaning and Ma Wei thought, Yang Chindong was still very confident on his horse. It was as if he was not going to watch the battle, but directly entering the city. At this moment, Luo Pa was leading 2 companies of cold vanguards to rush forward. As he ran, he encouraged the cold vanguards beside him. "Everyone, hurry up. The 6th young master is right behind us. When the 6th young master arrives, the city gates will be broken. Don't delay the 6th young master's arrival." After mentioning the 6th young master 3 times, it seemed to be a little long-winded. However, to the cold vanguards it was the most encouraging words. At least at this moment, because everyone heard the name of the 6th young master, their speed increased. Chang Yuan's army was defeated and captured. Most of his men were either killed, injured, or surrendered. Less than 800 of them actually escaped. These people risked their lives to reach the city gates of Zhaoqing Prefecture and shouted for the city guards to lower the drawbridge. Unfortunately, the auxiliary and temporary auxiliary soldiers behind them had already caught up. The Huang bandit army in the city did not dare to open the city gates. Seeing that there was no hope of entering the city, the 800 deserters were afraid that they would be killed on the battlefield. One by one, they threw down their weapons and knelt down to surrender. Thus, the 3,000 Huang bandit army soldiers became prisoners of war. After bringing these people to the side, Battalion Commander Chen Bo led a company of cold vanguards to the city gates. Listen up, we are the mercenaries hired by the Duke of Loyal Courage of the Great Ming Dynasty. In the Guangzhou Prefecture, the 80,000 soldiers led by Huang Yuliang were also heavily injured by us. If you know what's good for you, immediately open the city gates and you will be considered to have made a military contribution. Otherwise, you will be punished for breaching the city gates. There were many ways to persuade the enemy to open the city gates. The soft way was to tempt them with benefits and say all sorts of nice things. The hard way was to use a harsh tone and use threatening words. However, there were too few examples of people being able to persuade the enemy to open the city gates with just a few words. For example, the 2,000 Huang bandit army soldiers had no intention of opening the city gates. When Cheng Yuan fell off his horse, they noticed that something was wrong and had already sent people to the Wuxia prefecture to ask for help. As long as young Master Huang received the news and arrived with his troops, the crisis in Zhaoqing prefecture would naturally be resolved. Chen Bo stood at the foot of the city gates and shouted 3 times. However, no one used words to reply to him. Instead, a few arrows were shot in front of his feet. This was because the distance was not enough. Otherwise, Chen Bo would have been injured. You're courting death. Chen Bo felt like he had been slapped in the face when he saw a few arrows stuck in the ground 7 or 8 meters away from him. His face turned ashen. Men, kill those who shot the arrows for me. Yes, battalion commander. Among the cold vanguard, there were people who could not wait to test their skills. Now that they had Chen Bo's orders, there was no need for them to hold back. They laughed and raised their guns to shoot. A Huang bandit army soldier who was holding a bow and arrow on top of the city gate tower unfortunately became the target. Before he could pull his arms back, he heard a crisp gunshot. He was shot between his eyebrows and fell from the city gate tower. This was only the beginning. Following that, the other cold vanguard soldiers began to search for their own targets. Within the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, 9 Huang bandit army soldiers who wanted to shoot arrows were killed. They either fell from the city gate tower or died within the city gate tower. The deaths of these people shocked the Huang bandit army soldiers who were guarding the city. It also shocked the 2,000 auxiliary soldiers who were watching from the side. The battle just now had been extremely satisfying and smooth. The situation had been one-sided from beginning to end. Many of them had not felt any danger and had won the battle. However, this kind of shock was not as great as what they saw in front of them. When they saw that every Huang bandit army soldier who was exposed on top of the city gate tower would quickly fall to the ground and die, they finally understood what the cold vanguard represented. In the past, they had always heard the auxiliary soldiers talk about how powerful the cold vanguard was and did not think much of it. Now, it seemed that everything was true. It was just that their vision was too narrow and they could not imagine it. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.